Well, thanks everybody for coming, and please, there's a few seats in the front, so for all of those of you who are staying in the back, come on up. We're all friends here. So, well, gosh, thanks so much for coming. We want to sort of get things started here today with this sort of mini panel before we sort of get in the meat of the day. But I thought I might do a little bit is just sort of give you a little origin of where this book came from, and it's sort of unusual that that the Federal Reserve would partner with a nonprofit finance organization to sort of put these ideas together. But really, in many ways, Nancy is such an intellectual leader. She's a leader of her organization, but also of the field. And it was really conversations we had had over the years that were kind of bubbling up to sort of say we were at something of an inflection point. We needed to make some changes in the community development world. And what was sort of and in those conversations, we often sort of take on different roles. And then Nancy's, and my role often was sort of the bad cop, and Nancy was the good cop. And I would sort of say, gosh, you know, here we are. We've built, and the main tool for community development is service-enriched affordable housing. We've built 3 million units since 1987 with the low-income housing tax credit. This is an amazing accomplishment. More units than exist from all prior building eras back to when the government got into that business in 1937. A huge accomplishment, and yet, if you look at the numbers, you still see things that are very distressing. You have about the same number of people living in poverty as you did when we got started. You go, even with housing as our main tool, you have people using, with the HUD worst case needs assessment at about the same rate as it was before we got started. And so it seemed like we were sort of taking one step forward and then falling 2 steps back. And so I was very frustrated, and I thought, well, we just have to do something different and try to get some sort of breakthrough in order to be more effective. And Nancy would kind of come back and say, look, you know, lighten up already? You know, why be so dour? You know, there's a lot of things that are working, in fact, you know, and so you look at things like a revolution in our understanding about when these sort of intervention points can make a big difference in someone's life, particularly in the early stages. And so, for example, we had Jack Shonkoff at our conference at the Fed yesterday talking about sort of really the person who was behind much of the research from that brain malleability from 0 to 5 that was now learning that if you can create a really rich environment, you can actually dramatically improve the life chances of a child. So she said, look, there's ideas like that, and then there are people you're going to hear from like Shirley Franklin and Angela Blanchard who are doing just sort of working miracles in places like Houston and Atlanta. And so she said, look, let's focus on some things that work. And so that's really sort of the origins of the book, was this sort of this tension between, gosh, we're not doing enough, but there are some things that are working. And we thought we wanted to kind of bring that all together. There's also a bit of this background on community development, which is sort of my lifelong journey to try to explain to my mother what I do for a living. And it's not working, but the first section of the book is really sort of kind of gives you a background on what community development is, so you get a better sense of it. So I just wanted to, that was really sort of where we got started, and I wanted to just give you a sense of the arc of the day, how we're going to try. This is in an effort to sort of capture some of the book themes and try to sort of give you maybe a taste of what's in there, and maybe and we hope will sort of entice you to sort of explore further. But basically, through the panels here, we're going to go. We're doing an overview panel, and that's the first one, Places in Poverty. Then we're going to focus, and this is, if you write a book that says investing in what works, people are going to ask you, well, what works? And that's the second panel, right? And then the third panel is, okay, these are some great prototypes, but how do we change systems in order to make more of those possible? How do we create new ecosystems and new environments where you don't have to be, as I say often, a super genius with a billionaire friend in order to make a difference in your community? And so that's the third panel. So, and then we'll have the closing remarks. So I just want to thank you all for coming. That's basically what's going on in terms of the agenda. And I do want to just also sort of give some recognition to the authors and the advisory committee in the audience. And you know, this book started, you know, basically Pam and her group at the Citi Foundation and Nancy cooked up the idea for this book, pitched it to us. And I thought, well, Nancy was very interested in getting it out, you know, well before the election. And I thought, okay, well, we'll try to do that. And I did not think we would be able to pull it off, but from the day she pitched the idea to the day we had a book in our hands was 18 months. And I've never, ever worked on a project like that. There are more than 40 authors who were involved, a much larger advisory committee. And what really happened was people who, this is not their main job. This is things they did on nights and weekends, and really it was a labor of love, were submitting their chapters and their articles, and they were nearly perfect as soon as they came in. I've never had that experience before, but it just really, I think, speaks to a deep desire that people wanted to bring these ideas forward and really sort of enrich the conversation in a way that we haven't had before. So if I could just ask, if you were an author or on the advisory committee, would you please stand up so that we can recognize you here? Great. Well,
sure. So I'll tell you who I am. I'm Nancy Andrews, and I'm the President and CEO of the Low Income Investment Fund. And it's been just an incredible privilege for me to have the opportunity to work with David Erickson, Ian Galloway, Ellen Seidman, who were the co-authors or co-editors of this book with the Low Income Investment Fund, as well as with the team at Citi, which has been a longtime partner and a longtime friend of LIF. This is a project, I almost hate to tell David this, but when you write a book and you get done with it, you know what it's like to kind of have written your senior thesis and then you try to read it again and you really just don't ever want to see it again. This is a project, we finished the book, but now the real project is beginning, because the real project is all about a conversation that we want to start throughout the United States in the community development field, but much larger than that, to lift up the things that we know after 40 years of doing this, we know are making a difference in communities and we believe are making a difference. I especially want to thank Pam Flaherty, who's sitting to my left, your right. This book would not have happened without the support of the Citi Foundation. They've been a partner to us all the way through it. They will be a partner with us as we go through the rollout in regions and places across the country with these conversations. And they have been a partner and supporter of building communities all over the United States and now globally for many, many decades. And a key funder of my organization, which they have been funding us now for 28 years. And I think what that says is that Pam and Citigroup believe in the power of people and place. They believe in the central role of communities as a source of opportunity for Americans. And what we have been doing with this book really is simply putting an exclamation point beside the work that Citi and Pam have been doing for many, many decades. So it's really a privilege for me to be able to sit here with Pam and ask Pam to say a few words to you.
Well, this is going to sound like a love fest because now I'm going to talk about Nancy. The best part about being a funder and a partner is that you get to spend time with really creative, incredible thinkers about these topics that impact our communities so heavily. And at the top of our list is always Nancy. So when she comes to New York to visit or we go to the West Coast, these are the special times when we really get into broad discussions, not just, what are we currently working on, but what's going on in the world? How does this all fit together? And it was in one of those conversations that the question was asked to Nancy, these are great ideas. Who else is thinking this way? Who else would be? And then at some point, the conversation drifted to the comment of, Nancy, you should write a book. And Nancy says, oh, no, I'm too, modest and whatever. But the idea germinates. This is my version of it. She probably has another version. And so then she came back with the better idea and said, I'm going to get together a few dozen of my closest colleagues in the community development field, and we're going to write a white paper. And she talked about getting involved really key thinkers. And I think at the top of that list was Ellen Seidman. And that was an example of the kind of person that we wanted to engage in this dialogue. So it started out with the idea of a white paper, and 28 chapters later, it morphed into this book. And Nancy had also the genius of saying, we need to reach out to a different kind of partner. And I think involving the San Francisco Fed and David and the team has just been the perfect combination. And I think what's incredible about this book, as David talked about the time frame, but the other incredible thing about this book is it's actually readable. If you read, you can pick up the book and read a chapter about a topic that you're interested in, and you'll actually learn something from that, which I think is really incredible. And the last comment I'll make is about this whole issue of thought leadership. And it's not really what you know, but what you can communicate to others and what you can cause to happen. And that really is the last point I would make, which is the book is just the beginning of the conversation. Because what we're trying to do is open this conversation of, great 40 or 50 years, but now what do we do? So with that introduction, let me turn it back.
Yeah, sure. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask you to spend just 3 minutes with me and with those of us up here on the stage watching a video. The video is something that came out of, I always say, if you're not really sure what to do, follow your staff. This video came out of an experience where I followed my staff to visit an early learning center that we had supported. I have to say that in 34, at this stage it's 40 years of doing this work, but I like to say 30 years. In some years of doing this work, this moment when I joined my staff and visited this child care center was one of the most moving that I've had in my entire professional career. And I got so excited about it that I went back and I started shooting off emails to David and to Elaine Arkin with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and other colleagues and friends. And I have to say, Elaine at Robert Wood Johnson really caught the passion that I have and I felt about this, and immediately sent a film crew out to this location and produced this 3-minute video that you're about to see. This will be available to you online. People are tweeting right now as we are going through this, and the link to this video will be tweeted. I also want to remind you all that we have a website, which is www.whatworksatamerica.org, and we are inviting you to participate in this larger conversation. Our book, as long as it is with only 400 pages, only has a part of the voices that need to be heard. And our website is intended for many, many voices to be included and involved in this project. So you can tweet. The tweet is #WhatWorks. You can blog. You can write additional comments. You can submit ideas to us and be a part of this conversation. And we will be having regional rollout meetings over the next 12 months. So this is intended to be a very vibrant and inclusive process. But if you will join with me now, just for 3 minutes, to watch the story of the Booth Child Care Center, that would be wonderful. And then we can talk about that a little bit later. The Low Income Investment Fund is a community development financial institution. We take large investments from Wall Street firms and we break them into smaller pieces and invest them in neighborhood projects. We made this grant to the Booth Child Care Center as a way of helping the center improve the quality of the space where the children play. The investment that we made in Booth helped improve the floors, the sinks, play space for the children, and the garden.
I got here in May 2009. The floor really was unfriendly, filthy at the time, and needed some help. And I knew that the first thing was to get it deeply cleaned. We cleaned it and cleaned it, yet children and staff their asthma was flaring up, and everybody blamed the carpet, which was correct.
When I first started, because I have asthma and I have allergies too, I was only taking one medication, but once I started working here, they put me on 3. But I noticed the difference when we had the changes of the floor, the whole environment. I only take one pill. I don't have to take the nasal stuff. All that stuff has gone away. So I feel really good about that.
So the entire center is free of the old rug, and now we have a real great friendly floor in the infant room, the toddler room, the lobby, just about everywhere.
The grant that we made was for $80,000, but the Booth Child Care Center is so entrepreneurial that they took that money and they went to other funders, and they were able to take our money and actually double it to $160,000 that was invested in this child care center.
And we're very proud of our patio. Before, we had a patio that really had horrible floor. Everything was patched up, taped up with masking tape. And now we have a beautiful patio that's usable and child-friendly, and you can see it's a functional classroom.
Now, everything is safe, and you know that when you come in, you just have to wait till pickup time. You don't have to worry about anything else.
We've seen the child care center's finances become much more sustainable because the attendance for the children is up. The children are no longer in the emergency room because of asthma attacks. Mom and dad aren't in the hospital with their children, so they get to go to work, and it improves the family income. And the center is saving health costs because the disability claims of the child care workers are down by a huge amount. The Booth Center is an excellent example of what I call investing in what works. We can take this, and we know that it works, and we can take it from town to town and city to city and make these kinds of investments in ways that multiply power over and over again. So this is, I think, just a wonderful example of how even very, very small investments can have enormous power, can have multiplier effects over and over. It was a completely serendipitous, discovering the connection that exists between investing in childcare and the ultimate health value and the ultimate employment value of that in terms of parents getting to work was completely unexpected to us, because we had been doing this simply to make sure there were spaces for kids in childcare. But when you begin thinking outside of the box and thinking about the ripple effects that go beyond one investment to another, and then telling the story and then recording that so that others can understand it as well, you brick by brick and step by step begin building an extremely powerful story. And that is exactly what this book and the conversation that we want to have is all about. I am going to do a couple of housekeeping matters. I'm going to remind you that we are in a live webcast. Encourage you to submit questions. Those of you who are online and on the web, you can submit questions via Twitter with our hashtag #WhatWorks, or you can use the webcast questionnaire form to do that. Please continue, even after this meeting is over, be a part of our conversation through our website, www.whatworksforamerica.org. Each of our panels for the remainder of this event will be a moderated conversation. We want you to be a part of that conversation. And so you should have cards in your packets that will allow you to write questions on the cards. And if you have one, please raise your hand and someone will come and gather it. And last but not least, the bathrooms are downstairs. So let me now bring the first panel up to the stage. And thank you all for getting us started.
I'll tell you what, while we're all getting mic'd so that we don't have too much downtime, I will get us started. I'm Ellen Seidman. I had the privilege of being a visiting scholar at the San Francisco Fed earlier this year and helping to co-edit this book. And this first panel consists of three people who know and have been a part of this field for a very, very long time. They're all Washingtonians. You probably know know one or more of them, but we're going to have a very lively conversation that's going to go beyond what you've heard them say before. So we have Peter Edelman, who's the co-director for the Center on Poverty, Inequality, and Public Policy at Georgetown University. Alan Berube, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution Metropolitan Policy Program, and Sarah Wartel, who is the president of the Urban Institute. And the purpose of this panel is to set the stage for the day. And just a reminder, tweet, ask questions on your cards. We actually are going to be interactive. We did this yesterday, and it was very interactive, and I'll bet you can do even better. So with that,
Okay? Okay. So Peter, as you describe in your chapter, which is one of my very favorites in the book, you've been part of modern community development from the very beginning. And you make the point that even in the 60s, we had this desire for comprehensive solutions, but it was a different kind of thinking about comprehensiveness. What's similar from the 60s to today, and what's different about how we're thinking about community development today?
Well, I think that we want to talk both about what's different in terms of what we're doing, but also the challenges we face and how we've done. First of all, I just want to say how important this book is, and you know, and Nancy and David know, I think all of you know, there really isn't been this compilation of what we know, and a lot of what we know is good to guide us. And what it addresses, we have 46 million people in this country who are poor by the kind of inadequate way we measure poverty. But what is the toughest poverty, and also the most politicized poverty, is the persistent and intergenerational poverty, and that in turn is heavily connected to place, both urban and rural, and now increasingly suburban as well. So this book is not only on target on this subject, but this is the subject. We want to end poverty, but we really need to attack persistent and intergenerational poverty. We need to be aware that, and this is a part of the answer to your question. I hope everything I say is part of the answer to your question, but you never know. This has been an uphill battle because we have done a lot that works in public policy to ameliorate poverty in general, much less well in relation to inner city and other parts of persistent and intergenerational. And so even though we're keeping 40 million people out of poverty by Social Security and food stamps and earned income tax credit and so on, 46 million people. And that particularly manifests itself in relation to the communities that we're talking about here, because the efforts to do something that pays off with outcomes that reduces the magnitude of these issues in these communities and neighborhoods, we've been fighting an uphill battle. And that uphill battle is twofold, and it's important to keep it in mind if in a general sense, apart from the terrific examples that we have in the book and that we know are out there in Houston and Atlanta and in other places. One is that the economy we've turned into a low-wage nation. And that's important across the board, but it has a disproportionate effect on people in these communities. And the other is that on top of what's happened to our economy in general, globalization and all the rest of it, that we've come to have these tough, knotty problems that manifest itself when we have too many low-income people, too many poor people all living in the same place. And so we've been fighting uphill against both of those things. There are a number of things that I think we have not understood well enough. If you go back to Bedford-Stuyvesant, where I had a little thumbnail or fingernail in helping there, which the book shows us some people, namely the authors of this book, but then others, obviously, understand now, but which we have not understood. And I think that I'll just list them fairly quickly. Number one, how much of these issues that we're dealing with directly in neighborhoods that have such serious issues it's heavily influenced from the outside. And so if we do get wages up for people in general, it's going to help build community. There's going to be a stronger economic base in these communities. So much of what is wrong inside these neighborhoods is you have to have leadership there to make progress, but it comes from outside. It's from forces that we don't do enough about the connection. The school system in general is downtown in terms of the control, et cetera, as well as the economy. And of course, that leads to I think a major point that we're finally sort of waking up to. There was, I don't know whether to call it a mythology or anyway, a belief at the beginning that we could solve the inner city problems within the four corners of the neighborhood. I remember so vividly, and obviously many in the room know, Robert Kennedy was so excited that we could get his friend Tom Watson to locate an IBM plant in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Like, oh, that's going to be it. You know, nobody will be poor anymore. And I mean, that's a little over the top. But it's come to us rather slowly that, and you know, it was even largely true then, that the jobs are in the region. And you need to figure out, I mean, there's a lot of things, the schooling and the job training and the transit for sure, all of that goes into thinking regionally. But I have to say it's disappointing how many of the initiatives that we've had around the country over this period of time have not gotten past that really naive idea that we can create enough jobs for people who are resident in the neighborhood, essentially within the four corners of the neighborhood. And so we're waking up to that, and I think that's good. Thirdly, the whole question of schools, but more broadly, the whole question of investing in children. Because as Elizabeth Duke says from the very beginning of the book, we now understand this is a combination of people and place and people. It's not, it just is all of that. And you know, you want to say, well, we should have got there, you know, et cetera. But we're getting there. And so that's the point of Promised Neighborhoods as an entry point for multidimensional initiatives. And it's also true, I'd say parenthetically, and as the book says, that healthcare more and more, particularly with the Affordable Care Act, is an entry point and an organizing point. But we absolutely are finally beginning to see people who've been doing good work on housing and on sort of physical aspects of the community over a long period of time, and have produced tangible numbers of housing units and commercial development that brings in, kind of a spine of stores and all of that. But finally, we're seeing people say, oh, we've got to, and charters help in this. I don't want to get us into a side debate about charters because that's complicated, but charters do help in this because they're much more flexible to get one started. So it's no accident that here in Ward 7, where we have a Promised Neighborhood awarded with the Cesar Chavez Public Charter School as the anchor, or Jeff Canada's work, that the charters play a key role in that. So getting to the schools and starting with early childhood, and Jack Shonkoff was here to remind us if we needed reminding and all of that, and he's in the book. The investing in children, as obvious as that is, we're getting around to it now as a key organic, very, very just really important part of what we would do. That's how you break the cycle. Right. And related to that, that it is a duplex thing. It's working with the families as well. I mean, it's again, one of these things that we all ought to understand. You can't do school reform out of poverty by itself. You can't do anti-poverty without having wonderful public schools. We've got to have all of that. So we need to be paying attention not only to the poverty and the low incomes of the parents, but sad to say, we've got to deal with some of these embedded things that are there after decades of intergenerational poverty, where we have parents who have had their kids too young, have had dad isn't around for, in many obviously reasons have to do with the way the criminal justice system works, but nonetheless. One of the things that I think we might have done a little better with in the book, Ellen, is to face up to these family structure and behavior questions that I think are huge blocks, huge barriers to making progress in these neighborhoods. And, it's uncomfortable. But the fact is, when I went out to Ward 7 the other day to take a look at our Promised Neighborhood here in Washington, that's very much what it's all about. Very much a two-generation strategy, starting from when the kids are born, home visiting, all kinds of parent participation there's educare there, but in the early childhood, in the school, all of that. So I really need to underscore that. And that's a problem that we didn't face up to at all when we started this work in the 1960s. Just a couple more things. We've learned, and David Erickson says it so well in the book, and I think it's another place where we sort of fell down at the beginning, and that is that this only works if there are multiple actors. All of the different players in the community working together, collective impact, whether we call it a quarterback or that's, for the sports fans that works anyway, but it's certainly better than lead agency or intermediary or, we couldn't got all those words out there that put you to sleep. And so we absolutely need your example in the Nancy in the video of the $80,000 and what that produced in terms of the leverage and getting all and listening to what's happening in Houston and Atlanta and so on. It's always we've got to harness all the actors in the community with all the different responsibilities that they have. We need to be clear, I think, about one of our objectives. And this is me, I don't know, but I think I think you all ought to agree with me. And that is a principle of choice. We've had this debate for a long time about, are we building up the neighborhood? Are we trying to have everybody move out? What is it? And the answer is both, because many people are very, very tied in appropriate and understandable ways that's their community. and it's got lots of problems, but it's their community. At the same time, there are a lot of people who would prefer, if they had the chance, and who, in their case, will do better if they can move in another neighborhood. The asthma might go away, et cetera, but lots more things than that. And that's not the policy that we're really pursuing in a serious way. And there are political problems about it, but really people ought to have a full choice about where they will live, what will be the community in which they live, and not be penned in somewhere and not be pushed out somewhere, but have a genuine choice. So, and then finally, I would say with Paul Grogan and Angela Glover-Blackwell that we need conscious policy advocacy. We need that just in a serious, intentional way to do these things and to understand, and I think this is clear to all of us, but the federal government, which needs to do more, and under this administration was starting to do more, and we hope we'll be able to, but this is so much a challenge to the local community, from within the neighborhood and more broadly within the city and more broadly within the metropolitan area and with the state role as well, and starting with the leadership in the area where people live there, and the responsibility, as I said, of everybody who lives there, but on out the civic responsibility. So I think that since we started, we've had a lot of experience, we've done a lot, but we really have to ask ourselves very, very soberly why we haven't gotten more done. And I think this book helps us.
Well, thank you. And it's a really good segue for Alan. I'm not going to ask you the question I said I was going to. Because Peter raises the critical issue that community development tends to focus on communities, but is that the right focus? And should we be thinking more about integrating the communities that we're talking about into the broader economy? Or is the problem really the broader economy? And as Clara Miller and Angela Glover-Blackwell talk about in the book, have we gotten to the point where poverty, poor communities are not the exception, but unfortunately too much the rule, and it's our economy that needs to change?
Yeah, so thank you, Ellen. I just want to, as sort of Peter said at the beginning, I'm really pleased and honored to have been a part of this project. It's a little bit of an out-of-body experience to follow Peter Edelman on a panel about poverty, so I just want to stipulate that from the outset, so excuse my comments in advance. I think what you're getting at, Ellen, is exactly at the core of, I think, what I've been trying to do through my work, what a lot of people have been trying to do through their work, is sort of understand exactly what Peter was talking about, these larger forces that exist outside of the community that are in many ways responsible for the creation of these new communities of poverty that form some of the basis for my research, the fact that we actually have more poor people now living in suburbs than these inner city neighborhoods that were responsible for the birth of community development and its continued relevance today, because of course concentrated poverty hasn't gone away, but new poverty is cropping up in these places that I think for most community development practitioners would look completely foreign. Through this work we've been doing on suburban poverty at Brookings, we've been visiting communities like Antioch in the far eastern Bay Area, so drive 30 miles east of Oakland into what was not too long ago an agricultural community, but is now home to a lot of new single-family developments, huge foreclosures, voucher holders who had moved out from inner city San Francisco and Oakland in search of the American dream, but there was no economy there. The only economy that was there was building housing and everything that went along with that. When that collapsed, it just left very poor communities in its wake. And this is a place that doesn't have community development per se. It doesn't have much of anything other than some scrappy folks who were doing a little bit of job training there, and now their problems have multiplied tenfold. But you'd find that in this region. If you went out to Prince William County, you'd find it, the suburbs that ring, declining regions like Cleveland. You find it in immigrant enclaves that are south of the city of Seattle, big portal for refugees. So all of these communities, in a way, are they're not suffering, I would say, from a lack of affordable housing or some of the tools that were really at the heart of building communities and trying to rebuild economies in the inner city. They are a victim of an economy that's just left a lot of people behind and has not created opportunity for people who don't have the skills, that are weighed down by these problems with family structure and intergenerational poverty in some cases. So I think the challenge is, and as we visit these communities, of course, none of them say we got an affordable housing problem. They say we have a skills problem. We have a problem with economic connection between our communities and the broader opportunities that might exist elsewhere in the region. So what is it about the present or the future of community development that's really going to help to tackle these human capital, human resource issues in new ways? Perhaps affordable housing is part of the solution there, but I think we need to challenge ourselves on that. And I think we need to consider, how is community development poised to play in and influence discussions about the shape and the structure of the economy, which I think, I don't think the federal government has such a great view on that. I think there are corners that do. These discussions are really taking shape at the state level, at the regional level, but I wouldn't say that all community development organizations are necessarily poised or structured in such a way that they can play at the big kids table when regions are figuring out, what are we going to focus on, what are we going to try to build here or attract here that's going to not just grow more jobs, but grow better jobs, and we're going to equip the people in these communities with the skills and the human capital to participate in those jobs.
So Sarah, how are we going to do that all with fewer federal resources?
Well, let me start with my 30-second testament to how important I think this book is, and the word I am using is catalytic. In one sense, it's describing things that everyone in this room has seen their piece of for some time. So each of the chapters, and you look at the summary, part of it is, yeah, of course. But in another way, you're giving name and frame and framework to a set of conversations that have been happening amongst people in a way that others outside this world can relate to and take it. And I see how this approach to policy is working in helping to drive how we think about research at the Urban Institute, as I'm driving my colleagues crazy, reminding them over and over, and even in the federal government too. So I really think this is an important undertaking, and I really applaud Citi and the San Francisco Fed and LIFT for taking it on. Resources, I guess just the first thing to say is there will be fewer. There will be a lot fewer. We can get past the fiscal cliff, but the fiscal cliff is simply an action-forcing mechanism that does a very bad job of deciding how to close a gap, to force people to find another way to figure out how to close a gap. And closing that gap will require inevitably spending less on things that all of us think we spend probably too little on already, which means that we have two choices how to deal with that. The traditional Washington way of dealing with that problem is to say, all right, guys, we got 90 cents where we once had $1. Let's figure out how to divide the 90 cents up, and I'm going to fight hard with you to make sure that I get 94 and you only get 86. Well, that's constructive. And at the end of the day, everybody, if you got 94, you're celebrating. Well, what exactly have we gotten done? But we have another, come into the conversation, there's a new focus on evidence and using evidence, making evidence-based policy and deciding who gets 94 and who gets 86 based on whether or not they can prove that they make an impact. And I welcome the focus on evidence coming from a research-based organization, but we need to think a little bit differently about what that evidence is and how it's developed. Yes, we have been talking about the importance of the gold standard research proof point, But very few people who are trying to solve problems on the ground really want to wait for the Urban Institute to come in and come back 10 years later with a long-term, longitudinal, random control trial assignment to tell them whether something was working or not that they probably knew 6 months in was going to be successful or not. And so we have to start thinking about creating a continuous learning cycle where information comes back into communities so that the people who are doing these things get real-time information that can inform the choices they make. So evidence is hugely important in this fight, but it is a different way of thinking about evidence that I think will be a driver. And then the other thing we've got to do is think about how do we make this not a moment where you take 90 cents on the dollar and divide it up, but you figure out, well, we've got 90 cents on the dollar in your sector, and we got 90 cents on the dollar in your silo. Well, what if we put those 90 cents together? Now we got 180 instead of 2. But the fact is, maybe we can make more productive the aggregation of the two. Remember that when you were spending 90 cents on your housing problem, you were frustrated because you couldn't use housing to get to all the social outcomes we thought we wanted to because there were still educational issues or healthcare issues or social service or job employment issues. Well, when you're in the employment sector, you can't solve for the mental health and the physical environment of people in a job training program. Well, what if we're suddenly delivering those services in a coordinated way, and maybe then your 180 cents instead of $2 can be more productive? And it really, we have to figure out a way to make this a catalytic moment. And so let me just end by saying that I think that the opportunity for catalyst is not going to be in trying to figure out how Washington can suddenly give its money in dramatically different ways. I don't think we will be the place that does that innovation, unfortunately. I think we can, we're not going to change the structure of the congressional committees. We're not going to turn into giant pooled funding going into communities that somebody in town could figure out. But we can develop what Peter referred to as the quarterback that is mentioned in Nancy and David's chapter. I like to call it the orchestra conductor. But it's the person who can figure out how to bring those streams together in ways that, with evidence that is more, that by coordinating them, you're able to get to better outcomes off a number of different measures. And I think we're going to need orchestra conductors at a variety of different levels. We need it in community, and ultimately this is bottom up. This has to be driven by the needs of a community. But we also need it, as Alan's talked about, at the regional level, where there are people thinking about problems beyond any one particular community that are essential to figuring out what makes something in that community work. And we need it at the federal level, where there's someone who can help at least, we start talking about, instead of busting silos, because we'll all be very old before that ever happens, but maybe piercing silos and adding some flexibility between the different programmatic outcomes. So if we can come up with a way that we can coordinate and make beautiful music of all of these different initiatives, maybe this will be our transformative moment where we'll actually leapfrog, take advantage of the adversity to actually get to something that leapfrogs and is much more effective with our scarcer resources.
Great. Now, I want to remind all of you to put your questions down and raise your hand so someone will come pick them up. And if you are watching online, or frankly, if you're in the audience and like to tweet, you can tweet on #WhatWorks. One thing that we had sort of a difficulty with several times in the process of writing the book is sort of what's the focus. And semantics can be really important. And for a lot of people who work in low-income communities, they've often felt that the word economic development is code for let's fix up downtown and ignore everyone else, or for gentrification. So now we're saying we need to get beyond communities. We're saying we need economic development for jobs and incomes. How do we avoid falling into the old traps? Anyone want to start?
Well, I don't see anything wrong with the word community as long as we, compared to the economic development is too narrow, as we've already said. And so we need language that talks about this in its completely three-dimensional way. you know, when you asked Alan about the outside things, and Alan, you talked about the new communities that have issues as neighborhoods or communities. I would have put a little bit more both and in terms of the places that have already been in trouble for a long time. Because in the both and, you absolutely, whether it's to strengthen people's capacity to get out or whether it's to strengthen their ability to stay in a healthy community, we have to be thinking holistically, both within a neighborhood and simultaneously in the region. And indeed about the national policy beyond the issues of whatever we call it, community development, these issues of income. And I would add to that, again, an area that perhaps is not dealt with or addressed fully enough in the book, is this is also a question of race. Right. And the people who are in inner city neighborhoods are disproportionately people of color, African American and Latino or Hispanic. And we've got to be honest about that in terms of what it is that has, with reference to our attitudes about race in this country, and gender also, because the people who are stuck in the low-wage jobs are disproportionately single moms. And you need to open up that discussion. What is that about? But the economics of it are absolutely clear. Once you're there with only one person to send out to work in this sort of modern low-wage economy, you're very likely to be either in poverty with a job or very close to it. So the terminology has to get to all of these things, and so much simplifying, oversimplifying. You know, the whole question of what's happened to family structure in this country. Okay, well, it's also what happened to family structure in the world. It cuts across racial lines, and nonetheless, so many people think of it racially, and yet there are disproportionate numbers that we absolutely have to be honest about. And some of them have to do with family formation at the beginning, and some of them have to do with what the criminal justice system does along the way. But we get these simplistic answers. Well, why don't they just get married? And you know, do a little bit more. Well, there should be responsible fatherhood. Well, wait a minute. You know, let's get down to what's really going on. This is part of the answer. This is part of the subject. So.
Peter, I expect a blog post on our website. Yeah. Alan?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. I apologize to sort of keep coming back to this, you know, one anecdote about East Bay, California, but I think it illustrates how these issues get intertwined, you know, in a regional context, wherein, you know, many of the families who are there, they were the beneficiaries, so to speak, of mobility policies, right? So they were families who wanted to get out of inner city Oakland and inner city Richmond, you know, get to a safer place, get to what they believe would be a nicer neighborhood, maybe a slightly better school for their kids. But when they got to the other side and things sort of fell apart, not only are they possibly no better off, they might actually be a little bit worse off than they were in that original community, which is not to say they don't believe in the power of mobility policies and choice for families, but the public policy has not been intentional about moving families to communities with real opportunities. It's just sort of given people a voucher and sort of said good luck. And we haven't, I think it also points to the lack of this quarterback and this integration at the scale where we need it. Yeah, you can have, you know, one agency at the local level that's trying to pull these services together. But if Eastern Contra Costa County Housing Authority is not talking with the Oakland Housing Authority or the Richmond Housing Authority, these are just poor families who are getting bounced around a region without attention to what they need in terms of skills training, what their kids need in terms of a good school, what they need in terms of safe and high quality housing. So again, I just think scale really matters for getting this right for families, scale at the scale of the economy, the scale of what, in the end, the best antidote to poverty is getting a job. And I think we have to reconceptualize what we mean by community when we talk about community development if we're really serious about the economy as the best pathway out of poverty for families.
Sarah, you want to come on either on the general economic issue, or I know the Urban Institute's done an awful lot of work on mobility, and comment on some of that work?
Well, so a couple thoughts. I mean, give an example of some of the work that we've done on mobility, and what we find, of course, is that when people are moved, you make very significant, or given the opportunity to move into other communities, they have very significant improvements in one facet of their lives. The quality of their physical environment, in many cases their physical security, but there are other barriers to the ultimate outcomes that we've thought about. If the ultimate outcome is income, or if the ultimate outcome is health, well, it turns out there are other systemic barriers to them achieving that movement alone is not sufficient to deal with. And so I think one of the things that we have to think about, and I keep coming back to measuring and making these policies be data-driven, and it seems to me the hard part is that each of these different silos is working against a different measure of success. How many people do you move? Are they in units that are in meet building quality standards? Is a different measure than how many people are served with a different kind of health outcome, et cetera. And so what we have to figure out is, can we get together around a shared set of goals? And we're delivering all of these services around what we think are ultimate progress. And then people at different levels are coordinating. Now, Jack Shokoff yesterday made a very good point, which is it's not just shared goals, but it's also some shared knowledge base, because people in these different systems know, one set of people know health issues, and another set of people know job training and employment, and another set of people know something about housing or education. And they don't know each other's worlds well enough to be able to figure out where the opportunity is for the breakthrough collaborative. So I do think part of the challenge here is about measurement and getting to a shared set of measures, and the groups you coordinate around those shared measures sometimes. Some of them there needs to be a very strong community voice, but to the points that both Alan and Peter have made, you're not going to solve these problems within the four corners of the community, so you need other people in that process besides just community residents and voices.
Great. So we've got some questions from the audience and also from the Twitter feed. I don't know whether internal or external. I will start with the classic Washington question here. If community development works, why is poverty at a record level? Is this evidence of public sector failure? Would the private sector do better? Okay. Alan, why don't you start?
Well, this is a false dichotomy. I mean, so much of what community development is the private sector, right? It's the notion of leveraging private capital to address market failures that affect places and limit economic opportunity for individuals. So, I think without any public sector intervention, the fact that there is a market failure there suggests that private capital alone is not going to be sufficient to address some of the barriers that these communities face in connecting to wider economic opportunities. Is the existence of, what I talk about in my chapter, is the existence of poverty at higher levels today than in 1965 evidence that community development has not worked? That's kind of an unfair barometer. Jesus said we'll always have the poor with us, so here we are. I think Peter laid out really well what community development has achieved, and I think where it's fallen short, and the fact that, as I say in my chapter too, that what we've spent on community development, the effort we've put forth, the places it is and it isn't. It's a bit of a knife and a gunfight against the global economy. Again, I think this goes back to where we're talking about what's the right scale for this, what are the right sorts of activities for community development to focus on. So it really is wrestling more intentionally with the forces at work that are outside the community that in the end either circumscribe or advance opportunity for the people in those places.
But can I encourage that we embrace one aspect of the spirit of that comment, which is the notion that we bring the private sector to bear on parts of this challenge beyond the bricks and mortar elements, which is what we have traditionally done, and we've gotten very good at in organizations like LIF and others. The whole CDFI industry got very good at financing housing and then other kinds of retail facilities in communities. But the real question is, can we leverage private capital to make change in the outcomes in health and in the outcomes in employment and in the outcomes in the delivery of social services? And there, if you will, the plumbing of that system, to say is nascent is to be generous to it. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for us to figure out how we can bring the discipline and the focus on outcomes that the private sector brings to help drive us to more powerful change.
Great. I want to first remind everybody, if we don't get to your question, that gives you an opportunity to blog on our website. And we will actually try to answer some of these questions on the website ourselves, but we also hope that some of those answers will spark further conversation. I got a couple of questions on okay, so this quarterback thing sounds good, but how do we, what kind of skills do those people need, and how do we get the funding, get the strategies to build those skills, and also, frankly, figure out what works and what doesn't, even among quarterbacks. Anyone want to try that, Sarah?
Well, so a couple thoughts on it. How we fund it, it seems to me there are two places. This is very much, this idea of a quarterback role is very much the kind of thing that the focus on innovation that the administration has been trying to trigger in its I3 and education and other things has been doing. So I hope and encourage government not to be ultimately to be able to finance all quarterbacks, but to be able to test a few models of quarterbacking, and I hope we'll see some interest in that. I'm certainly trying. But I also think this is the real role for philanthropy in the near term, is to try some different models and to set the models up with some kind of what I would call 21st century form of evaluation support, research, and data, so that we are coming up with a framework to know whether it's working when we're putting these things together. And I would argue that philanthropy has to be play a key role in that. I do think we can look to non-traditional sources of philanthropy, however, because I think business interests in communities should have a real stake in this working, and there may be ways that we can leverage them as well.
And so just to build on that, I think what Sarah's highlighting is a key capacity the quarterbacks need is the ability to blend funding from different sources, government, private, philanthropic, stay ahead of, accountable to all those different sources. And then where they see new opportunities and new challenges in their communities, move resources in that direction. And ultimately, right, be the innovators in their communities, take advantage of their scale and their diverse portfolio to address new needs in ways that continue to attract investment and keep them ahead of the game.
This is a commercial for the next panel. Peter, I have a special question for you.
Okay.
So let me ask you this question, which was I think is really important. Your 6th point concerning behavioral and single unmarried parenting as a factor is true. What can be done? Can we use the bully pulpit of the government to change behavior? For example, what we did with smoking, we changed behavior significantly. And I would add to the question, or is something more needed?
Yeah, something more is needed.
Want to tell us about it?
Let me just say a sentence on the quarterback. It was implicit in what you said. It's got to come organically out of the community. It could be school-based. It could be somebody who's doing community development in a sort of physical facility. It could be from the health side. But one of the things that we did wrong with the empowerment zones, you probably don't even remember the empowerment zones, but was we imposed a structure on the community, and it was just doomed.
But can I just say that if we do let it come organically, we need to support them, which means we need to create networks of learning between quarterbacks,
Absolutely.
so it won't otherwise people won't get the benefits.
No, absolutely. Thank you on that. I mean, I completely agree, of course. Well, this is, I think, the toughest thing. I mean, we have now, going back really decades into the 70s, where we let these things sort of fester from one generation to the next. And government messages, but I don't think that's got a lot to do with it. I mean, I wouldn't send bad messages. This is a combination of finding ways, and it's why I was just in an immediate way so encouraged by my visit out to Ward 7 the other day, is in a microcosm. They certainly really get it. And it's breaking in to the cycle. It's number one, obviously there are messages, and the campaigns against teen pregnancy have done this pretty well. And the numbers are going down, although not nearly enough. Although I think those messages are much more local than they are national in terms of their possible effect. And the more they can come from people that young people would listen to, and not necessarily in a media kind of impersonal way, all of that. But you have to be talking about parents who frankly don't know anything about being a parent, and there's a baby comes into the world, and how do we reach that in a way that's not condescending, that's respectful, and that's helpful. And we have models that exist in home visiting, but then on through how do we make child care? It's more expensive to be sure that it's developmental, but to the maximum extent, and so kids are prepared for school, and then they go to schools that teach them, right? But at the same time, if they're coming from homes where there's violence in the home, where there is nobody's reading to the kids, I mean, we all know all of these things. It's an uphill fight and maybe a losing fight in terms of what's going to happen in school. So, but it is true that we have experiences that are evaluated. We do have evidence-based things that we can do, and that's just such a key part to doing it. But it's way more than messages. And let me say one more thing, which is I don't think we have, let me put it a different way. I do think that in so many of these inner city neighborhoods, we don't have the activated civic and community leadership that would provide those kind of insertion of caring adults in a constructive way into the functioning of the family. And I say all that with extreme care, because it's not simple to do it. But I do think that there are some issues about the responsibility within those communities to fight back. You know, Elijah Anderson called it the war between the decent and the street.
So I will just say I'm not going to ask these folks the grand economy question, which we've gotten a couple of times, and I think is really important, and we can actually have a good conversation about it on the blog. But in essence, the question is, so several of you have said that the big issue is improving incomes, having good jobs, making the economy work better. How do we do that? It's too big for right now. But we've heard you, and we will try to make sure that we get a good conversation going on the blog. I will end with a question that I think is really important. And it says, two groups we haven't discussed, seniors and veterans. Both seniors' needs are very different than they were 10 to 20 years ago. Veterans, whether or not they've been particularly those who've been in combat zones, have suffered severely and are not as vibrant a part of the economy as they ought to be. What do we? How does what we're talking about work for these two groups? Anyone want to?
Let me just make an observation, which is not an answer, but it's an observation. Those are two groups with different sets of needs. It's a more complicated part of thinking about the delivery systems. But they are also two sources. I'm connecting it to Peter's last point about what's not present in communities. They're two sources of contribution to some of these problems, as well as having their own needs. They are, in many cases, coming back with more skills that can play a role, that there are people at a different stage in life who may be helpful in some of the family. That's not always the case. I understand some of these are stressed populations too, but I think we should think about seniors and veterans as both communities that need to be well served by these integrated remedies, and also an asset as part of the remedies in those communities.
And I can just highlight a statistic from my chapter, which is that actually seniors are a much smaller share of the poor today, because we've done such I think, an excellent job through public policy of supporting incomes for seniors through subsidized medical care, through Social Security. The bulk of our issue with the poor today is the working age population. So again, it's not to dismiss the needs of seniors, and in fact, given the fact that the boomers are becoming seniors now, and they were the first suburban generation, many of these folks are in the sorts of communities that I was highlighting in my comments. But you know, the fiscal cliff and the debt and deficit discussions in front of us today in Washington, and what in the end is essentially a trade-off between the old and the young. I don't think we're remiss in the community development context keeping our focus on the young, because as Peter's work and his comments have pointed out, in many cases we're talking about an intergenerational strategy here, and if it becomes about these people versus these people, I don't think we're actually ever going to get at the real issue.
Seniors have a role to play. This is a place conversation we're having, although we're saying that it's more complicated than a particular place. And seniors have a great role to play within communities, and of course, in many cases, they are. Grandma is raising the kids rather often. Let me just say one other thing. I didn't talk about the young men in answer to your previous question, so let me just add that we have to particularly talk about that, and we obviously just can't put it off to reforming the criminal justice system. This is also about the individual effort for young men to see that there are possibilities for them that are positive, and that gets into a whole conversation about those caring adults, about how the schools function and so on. But I can't not say that, not omit the very great importance of talking about both young men and young women in that question that you asked me.
Okay, well, that wraps up this panel. Thank you very much. It's been really a terrific panel, and we appreciate you being here. And thank you for your questions.
While the next panelists are getting mic'd up, I will get started. And let me say there were a few seats down here in the front. For those of you who are standing, you have a minute to come take a load off up here. I am Rebecca Roberts. I'm delighted to be here to moderate this next panel. And I want to say a little bit, since we're having a place conversation, about where we are. here at Union Station. For those of you who are watching this webcast at whatworksforamerica.org, we're here in a working, busy train station. If you feel the earth move, it might be inspiration, but it's more likely the Acela to New York. And all this coming and going here sort of highlights what a transient town Washington can be, and a place that people come to talk about policy and get the ear of the federal government. But a lot of us live here. This is a community too. And I am here in part because Ellen Seidman is my next door neighbor. So she has had to throw a lot of home run balls back over our shared fence. And I'm hoping there's no connection between that and why she moved to San Francisco for 6 months to be a visiting scholar at the Fed. If you are watching online, let me reiterate that you can participate in this conversation. You can tweet, use that hashtag #WhatWorks. You can also email connect@whatworksforamerica.org. There also should be on the webcast a question feature that you can use to submit a form. If you're here in the room and would like to submit a question, can you raise your hand when you've got one so that our folks here can see you and come snag that card from you and bring it on up. So having just heard this panel where we've talked about some of these big numbers, the entrenched issues of poverty, things that have been going on for generations, new issues that have been either created or exacerbated by the current economic climate, it can feel a little overwhelming, it can feel a little disheartening, and so I'm delighted that this next panel is an antidote to that. This is examples of what works, and I promise you it's better than coffee. We have joining us, starting there on the end, Shirley Franklin joins us from Purpose-Built Communities. Shirley Franklin is the former mayor of Atlanta, and Purpose-Built Communities started in Atlanta as a project to revitalize one neighborhood, and it was such an enormous success that now that model is being replicated in places like Indianapolis and Charlotte and New Orleans. And Shirley Franklin is leading that effort, and she's here to tell us all about that. Next to her is John Robert Smith with Reconnecting America. Reconnecting America is a leader in transit-oriented development, although John Robert will be the first to tell you that all community development should be transit-oriented development. He should be right at home here in a train station. And Angela Blanchard joins us from Neighborhood Centers Incorporated. Neighborhood Centers actually is over 100 years old. I was interested to learn it was part of that settlement house movement of the turn of the last century, and has been growing and changing as Houston grows and changes. And Angela Blanchard has this simple but actually revolutionary idea that you don't define a community by what's wrong with it, but define a community by what's strong about it and then build on those strengths. So while I get mic'd up, I would like each of you to describe your projects and, in the interest of being evidence-based, tell us a little bit about how you define success and what says to you that you have succeeded. Shirley Franklin, let's start with you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and like others have said, very pleased to have an opportunity to participate in the book. And I'm a co-author with one of my former colleagues from the city of Atlanta, David Edwards, who is now leading part of the effort at IBM with Smart Cities. And we had lots of debate about this subject when he and I worked together, so we were delighted to have an opportunity to do this work. I lead an organization that is an outgrowth of a Hope 6 housing initiative that developed into a holistic approach to neighborhood redevelopment, place-based, heavily focused on people, heavily focused on children. Our quarterback, we didn't think of that, is a lead organization, not a very fancy name, but an organization that is formed by local leaders from the community, the broader community, who join with the residents of the community to take on essentially three elements. Education, cradle to college, mixed income housing, and wellness and community support programs. That lead organization brings their resources. Usually they bring a network of friends and associates, but they also bring expertise in business, civic leadership. They bring credibility. At Eastlake, where this started, it was considered the worst community in Atlanta for a long, long time. A place where police, firefighters, postal workers, no one wanted to enter that community. It was known as Little Vietnam. It had been a miserable experience for many people who live there. Most people were the victim of a felony. So in a very short period of time, we think, in about a decade after this work started, we have seen significant reduction in crime, significant improvement in student performance. Students who were underperforming, 95% were underperforming. Now 95% are at or meeting or exceeding the state averages. The students perform third grade through eighth grade higher than the city and the state average on every exam, in every subject, in every grade. So in a very short period of time, our school is a charter school. We think the school has to be neighborhood focused on the people who need it the most. And then the wellness programs include a wide array of programs, everything from a YMCA to other early childhood programs. And we have a heavy emphasis on golf and athletics, although we don't think that that is required. So shortly after the group that put this together decided that this was a model that other people would be attracted to, and thousands of people came, and those thousands of people all said, oh, terrific, we want to do this too, and then not much happened. So the original group decided that they would launch a separate organization to assist communities who would like to do this kind of neighborhood-based, people-focused, youth-focused, transformational work in other cities. And that not-for-profit now is the organization called Purpose-Built Communities. And we are delighted to meet all of you and would love to come to your hometowns.
Good morning. First, I want to tell you how pleased I am to be here this morning and especially share the stage with my two colleagues. I've read their chapters, reread their chapters again last night, and you're going to hear a recurring theme from the three of us, and it's neighborhood, neighborhood, neighborhood. And for me, neighborhood began in 1989 when I was waging a door-to-door campaign for a city council member in my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi, and I was in a historic, neglected neighborhood there, and Reverend Kelly came up to me and made me promise that if I was elected, I would not forget that neighborhood. Well, I don't take a promise to a man who talks to the Lord on a regular basis lightly. So we took all that we had, the 6 departments of the city, and the impact they could bring on that one neighborhood and what they could leverage from the faith community that said they cared about that neighborhood and now needed to demonstrate it. From that grew what we call Project Pride, and ultimately became the Last Hope 6 project, providing really quality places for our people to live, the last one approved in this country. The other neighborhood was the neighborhood downtown, where, playing to, again, the strengths, historic strengths of our community, we built what was the first multimodal transportation center in the South. And we started that in 1990. It opened in 1997, and have seen what has happened to lift that downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods and connect them. From that really grew what became Reconnecting America, and through my association with Reconnecting America, which has always been at the intersection of transportation choices and community development, expanding that definition to include the entire region or corridor, been able to work in the San Francisco Bay Area and in New York and in Pittsburgh and in the Twin Cities, where we've been engaged from the very first conversation of bringing the voices, the all-inclusive voices of the neighborhood around the table, actually to writing light rail systems that you've built and building the local capacity there so that that effort can continue for the next generation. As you look, though, and try to determine what has been successful, where are we succeeding, what works, to understand it, you have to be able to measure it. And the chapter that Allison Brooks and I wrote for the book really is the precursor to a publication that Reconnecting America has just released, Are We There Yet? And it asks the question, that you normally hear coming from your backseat on a family trip. Are we there yet? But in a more important way, are we there yet in building complete communities in this country? We studied the 366 metropolitan statistical areas around 33 measurable data points. We divided those MSAs into 4 population-based categories, so we were comparing apples and apples, and those 33 data points were divided among 4 headings of moving, working, thriving, and living. And you can certainly download this piece. You can see the work. You can also see the grades that are assigned to the MSAs. And while there are not many of our MSAs that are complete communities, what we did find was, looking block by block, there are opportunity areas within almost every MSA. And those opportunity areas are places that are not complete communities yet, but they have the bones for it. They have the grid system, they have the infrastructure in place to become complete communities if those governments and the people that support them apply their assets to fill the gaps that become readily apparent when you look at the grading system. The good news is, of the 366 MSAs, all but 49 have a number of opportunity areas, some in the downtown, some in suburban neighborhoods. There are those that get straight A's, that you wouldn't be surprised. New York City gets straight A's, but so does Lincoln, Nebraska. And I think that's a telling part of the work. It's not just big metropolitan areas. It's urban areas as they exist within big cities or even within small cities like my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi. I wouldn't be much of a former mayor if I didn't offer to take you back to Meridian, Mississippi and show you what has transformed in that little community, what we got right, what we didn't get right. But I'd also take you to Normal, Illinois, that just opened their multimodal transportation center, and see the wonderful things that are happening in the downtown there, and they're also beginning to address how their citizens live, their neighborhoods in connection to that downtown. Take you to Missoula, Montana, one of my favorite cities. Never been to Montana before, but Missoula, the university and the city have coordinated their transit systems, interlaced with bike lanes and with walkable downtown, to create a place that it's special and has a special feel and life to it. And they're also beginning to look at how their people live and integrate into that system as a whole. I'd also take you to Nashville, Tennessee, Davidson County. Going to have 1 million more residents coming in. How do they move them about? Where do they live? How do they provide for the senior population? How do they provide something as simple as health care in a region that's growing that rapidly? Certainly, transportation choices is a piece of it. I'd also ask you to talk to the Republican governor of Tennessee, who is tackling the obesity problem in Tennessee as an economic development impediment to his state. High workman's comp claims, high employee absenteeism traced back to health conditions that are ultimately based on the obesity that you find so rampant, especially through the South. And transportation choices are, again, a solution he is offering for the economic development and the health of his people. Mayors always talk about quality of life. Well, that certainly implies there is life. And my grandson's generation is the first generation in this country that's projected to have a somewhat shorter life expectancy than my generation is. What 20 years ago was called visionary for mayors, today it's a matter of practicality. It's about how you invest where you already have infrastructure for the people that ultimately you know you meet in the grocery store, you meet at church, and hopefully you love.
Angela Blanchard.
Well, first, I'm really glad to be up here with a couple of other Southerners.
Yeah.
And I feel like since I'm following John, you're already working on your translation from Southern to regular English, so you won't have trouble understanding me. I think that I can tell you the story about the project that got me to this stage without telling you a little bit about the extraordinary transformation of Houston. I think that when I meet folks, they always say, oh yeah, I went to Houston 20 years ago, and they still carry that picture in their head of this giant, sprawling oil and gas city. And really the story of the last 25 years in Houston is really extraordinary. It was a surprise to all of you, I'm sure, when you read that Houston became the nation's most diverse city in 2009. But not a surprise to me. At Neighborhood Centers, Inc., for over 100 years, we've actually welcomed people to the region. And I think that Houston fundamentally is a welcoming city. 70% of the people in the 6 million folks that live in the region weren't born there. We don't share a past, we share a future. So when people arrive, what we're interested in is what can you do and how hard will you work to do it here? We still have jobs. We have middle-class jobs. We have an unemployment rate less than 7%. So how does that matter, though, if you're in a neighborhood not connected to those opportunities? And I want to say here a little bit about poor people, because there was a lot of talk about poor people up here. So having been one, having grown up in the family very much like those that get described regularly in gatherings like this, and knowing as I do thousands of people who are living in neighborhoods and families designed the way many of us critique. And this is not about people being broken. It's not about places being broken. We talk about poverty as what we don't want without talking about what we do want. What we want is opportunities, and we want people connected to those. A neighborhood is where that begins. People don't move to regions, they move to neighborhoods. And they either find in that neighborhood doors that open to the larger opportunities or not. There are neighborhoods that get defined as cul-de-sacs of misery, and in Houston, the Gulfton Sharpstown neighborhood was one of those drive around it, not through it neighborhoods. Every story about Gulfton was about its lacks, gaps, needs, wants, everything that was broken. Its only claim to national fame was it was the highest juvenile crime zip code in the nation. So that's the kind of project Neighborhood Centers loves. We go right to those things because we believe that's where all the potential for transformation lies, and that's what we want to do. It was also the neighborhood where people from all over the world were coming to build a better life. It was the nation's new Ellis Island, and it was utterly riveting because what people were bringing were enormous aspirations, this intense conviction that in the soil in this country they were planting the seeds for a better life for themselves and their children. So what's happened? What we're all going to talk about is integration because, yes, we live in a siloed world. Everything's funded and researched and studied in a narrow, siloed framework, and we know at the neighborhood level it doesn't work that way. In the neighborhood that you live in, what do you want? You want a financial institution you trust, a school you're proud to send your children to. You want to go to a clinic when you need help, when you have an earache or a cold. You want simple things that matter in everyday life, and you want them, and you want to be able to get to them. So what we did, we think of as very, very simple. We put those things together in a 5-building, 4-acre site in the heart of Houston's most diverse community, where we conducted community meetings. We had to do so in 8 languages: Arabic, Urdu, Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, because that's who was there, and it was remarkable. And instead of the old story about Gulfton, we came out with a new story. And people funded, individuals funded, corporations funded, foundations funded the construction of this village center And if you can visualize this intensely colorful place with no fences and security, where you walk in and you can get your immigration status assessed, you can go to a clinic upstairs, you can cross the walkway and go into a high-performing charter school, you can walk on the walkway to the credit union, and the children do this once a week, by the way, to make a deposit in their savings account in the credit union. And then you can have your taxes prepared adjacent to the credit union, and then see a dance performance on the stage or watch an outdoor movie on the screen. This is a place for people to come together, find their voice, articulate their aspirations for themselves and their families. And here's the critical factor. In all the conversations about all the resources necessary to transform neighborhoods, the starting place is the people themselves. That's the primary resource, and we have to be rigorous in our study of what makes them get up every day and try so hard. If we are not building on the aspirations of the people we're trying to help, we're headed the wrong direction. It will not be sustainable. It is not respectful, and sometimes it does damage. So in the city, this giant, welcoming, 627 square mile, sprawling city, where everybody comes from everywhere, and I like to say where they've crossed the tracks, the river, or the ocean to get to a better life. You find that start in the neighborhood, and our deeply held desire is to find out what matters most to you in that neighborhood, plan with you how to bring that there so that you can use it to fulfill your own dreams and aspirations for yourself and for your children. So the numbers that matter to the outsiders, 11% increase in family income, 23% drop in crime, 18% increase in property values in the surrounding areas, 90% of the kids are kindergarten ready, 95% of them have a medical home. That's all good. There's nothing like sitting across from a person who's found their way to a better life, who can see their deeply held dreams and hopes for their children, that they can see the possibility of those being realized. There's nothing like being able to welcome someone to our country through a community center and say, what is it you're here to accomplish, and how can we start? That's priceless.
Well, okay, but no matter how much you plan, and no matter how much community input you seek, and no matter how good your research is, things happen, right? As you're building a community center or revitalizing Eastlake or a multimodal transit center, things surprise you, right? Things don't necessarily always go the way you thought they were going to go. So you learn from surprises. What are some of the things that made you rethink the plan to better serve the community? And what have you learned from those experiences? Angela, we'll start with you since we ended with you last time.
What surprises me is how well it works. I mean, no matter what we thought. See, this is the first time we got to push it as far as we wanted to really put it all together. Because, we'd always been asked to do a piece. We've had this idea, you could change a whole neighborhood on the backs of a clinic or a school or what. And it really, really works. The other surprise, the other beautiful thing is that people say over and over again, please don't just build something where I get help. Please build a place where I give something. I have something to offer. And that's the kind of response you get when you say to someone, not the old needs assessment, which honestly, I think I could slit my wrist at the thought of another needs assessment. And if you've been in this work, you've done 1 million, and they're miserable for everyone. Tell me everything that's wrong with this neighborhood. But when you're asking instead, what is it who do you trust in this neighborhood? Who do you go to for advice about your child? Who really showed you the way here? And when you put that picture of the community together, it surprises everybody because they discover there's really things that are working here, and deeply held wisdom and enormous resilience. So the surprise always for everyone is how much is already there, what there is to build on. That's the priceless moment.
Well, for me, the surprising thing is how replicable you see this across the country. very small cities, very large cities, different order of magnitude of the problem or the potential, but also a different order of magnitude of the resources to address it. You also see that at the local level, whether the mayor or those involved are Republican or Democrat, it simply doesn't make any difference at the local level. Those needs, those solutions, the voice that can articulate that isn't hemmed in by party definition. Shirley was a Democrat. I'm a Republican, served 16 years. We had laughed and talked. I bet you could take my speech around how our communities and neighborhoods are invested in, where people live, how they're connected by transportation choices, how we involve our children and commit to their education and bringing the arts back into the education of our children. You could take our speeches, swap them, and I bet we could give each other speeches with just as much force as we would give our own. Because in your hometown, if you know your hometown and you love it and you care about it and you're engaged in it, you see it and you respond. And you have an ear to your people. In many ways, for me, it's a matter of faith. I find that you have to be out in the streets of the city to see where the healing needs to occur. It doesn't happen inside the walls of anyone's sanctuary. It happens out in the streets, the larger sanctuary. You talked about a change you had to adapt to. Well, we're building the South's first multimodal transportation center, and Amtrak in Washington, D.C. calls to say they're cutting service south of Atlanta. Well, the last time someone from Washington, D.C. expressed interest in the railroads in Meridian, Mississippi, it was the spring of 1864. And we all know how that worked out. So we took it seriously and ultimately had to come to terms with solving a much larger national debate around transportation and how one system like Amtrak can connect this whole country, and how much in need we are of systems of transportation that relate to each other, something we envy in European cultures and in certain Asian cultures, and yet we still struggle, as proved by the last transportation authorization bill, we still struggle to get that concept here in this nation.
Well, now you know why John was a mentor to a lot of mayors, and he was a mentor to me. I was delighted to see him today. He was a leader among mayors, which is not easy to do because everyone has their point of view, they have their election commitments, etc. But it's great to be with you and to hear about your work. And I brag about Meridian, based on the work that John did. You know, it's hard to say what surprises you. When you've been a mayor, hardly anything surprises you. You've heard everything, you've seen everything, you've seen it in the grocery store, you've seen it in a spreadsheet. You don't really get surprised easily. And I worked for two mayors. So you add to the fact that I had worked for Maynard Jackson and Andrew Young to the fact that I was a mayor, hardly anything surprises you. But since I've been asked the question, I would say, in addition to some of the things that have been said before, what surprises me is how much more there is to learn. How much more we could know about what it is we're doing or trying to do, and with whom and how. So I really love this book because it is a full kind of sweep on not everything that's going on, but a lot of what's going on. I love the statistics. I like understanding what the trends are, where we were 20 years ago, 30 years, 40 years. I like the projections of where we can get to. So how much we can learn. And we in Atlanta, from the Eastlake Project, I mean, the way I talk about this, you would think I was front and center in the transformation of Eastlake. I was not. I was on the fringes. I was brought in before I ran for office by the Eastlake Foundation which is our lead organization in this community. I was brought in because the community work was so tough and so contentious and tense. And I was brought in really to help coach and understand what those tensions were about, and just to give a little bit of advice along the way. When I came in, I, like everyone else in Atlantic City, yeah, right, great idea. Little Vietnam is going to be transformed. Not in my lifetime. But a group of people, civic leaders, and this is where our approach, we try to marry the exterior with the interior in what we're doing. The external forces are represented by civic and business leaders and philanthropists. The internal are represented by the people who live in the community. We try to find a place, a way, a system, a process, and ultimately an organization in our case that commits to solving those surprises. Now, you ask me what about that project at Eastlake is surprising, it is the phenomenal success of the students. When we got the statistics that showed that 80% were scoring at or above, remember now 5%, 15% were performing at or above state standards a decade ago. When we got to 85, I was satisfied. But fortunately, I wasn't in charge of the school. Because I'm like, 80% is terrific. And the school, the leadership of the school, the board of the school, the parents, all said we want 100%. And do you know we're at 99%? 100% in some subject areas? And some of that, it has to do with the kind of persistent leadership that you hear from my colleagues, the people who just will not give up and have a big vision of what they can contribute, both internally and from the internal community, but also the external community. So those would be my two things. Number one, that there is still so much to learn. And secondly, that investment of time, resources, and the willingness to take a risk that people can succeed, and just take that risk and hang with it and hang in there. That's what we say in our office. We can just hang in long enough and get the right people to the table that we can see success in every community we work in.
And let me just reiterate, if you have a question, write it on your little card and raise your hand so that these folks can see you, or you can tweet using that hashtag #WhatWorks.
Well, I wanted to just add one other thing. John was a very activist-oriented, community-oriented mayor. I was mostly municipal services. So the work that was going on at the community level really didn't, in Atlanta and in many of the cities we work in, really is not coming from City Hall. It's really coming from community leaders who, for one reason or another, have decided, they don't want to see this marked segregation and really just dismal experiences that people are having because they don't have resources and opportunities. Most of the people who are driving the network members that we work with are coming from outside of government.
I think you can come from you start anywhere and take it everywhere that it needs to go. I think that the great conversation that we had yesterday is that, it's about leadership and owning something. And I remember when we were first on the campaign trail, if you will, to raise money and I want to say, you probably think we spent hundreds of millions of dollars, but the entire campaign for the program model and the new buildings and the land was less than $25 million. It was private support and new market tax credits, $25 million, and the return on that, it's already paid for itself 3 or 4 times. But the kind of leadership you see here is someone who gets up in the morning and says, this is my city. This is I'm not going to let this happen here. This is not going to be true here. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to move this forward. And no matter how long it takes, and you see people that have to commit beyond a term of office, beyond the initial grant, beyond the plan that changes because the resources shift or you have a hurricane in the middle of the campaign, by the way. I know that little storm Ike, I know y'all don't remember it, because y'all didn't even know there were hurricanes till it hit New York. I'm sorry. I just had to say that. I was talking with one of my New York friends about Superstorm Sandy, and I'm like, next time we have one in Texas, it'll be mega superstorm, whatever. But we had a really big storm right in the middle of this. So a lot of things happen as you do this. But if you've said, this neighborhood is too vital, and these people that we've previously thought of as a problem are really our future, and we cannot let this happen, then you do whatever it takes. And you know, the business of arranging the funding for this sort of thing is infinitely complex. If you want it to be simple, go home now. It's not going to be, because you're not going to make the world simple. All of these folks had to pull in multiple kinds of support over different periods of time to do different aspects of this. But the leadership commitment is to see it through, past the term of office, past the grant, past the first 5 people that liked it but then forgot about it 2 years later before you were done. You have to get it past all of that.
Well, then let's get to this idea of replicating it elsewhere, though. And I'm going to start with you, John Robert, because you said it was easier than you expected it to be. That if it's outside of, you know, your passion for your hometown, and you're trying to help somebody else ignite it somewhere else, who might have different funding issues, might have a different population, might not have a super genius with a billionaire friend, as you said. How do you move from your project and recreate it elsewhere?
Well, I think what you've heard is this doesn't bubble up out of the ground somewhere. There is a leading force. It's been called a quarterback or an orchestra conductor. I always thought of it as a champion who's willing to die in the ditch over the issue that is compelling them. And sometimes it comes from city government, but more often than not, it comes from the business community. It comes from average citizens who are moved and who are motivated, and from traveling. I spend most of my evenings in airports and train stations, and traveling across the country to generally smaller cities in less densely populated states. You find that the champion at the local level is different. The circumstances are different. The players at the table are different, and the assortment of financial options to bring to the solution are different. And I think that in itself is enlightening, is imaginative. It has caused me to look for far greater array of tools to bring to the solving of a problem than I used at home. And when you say replicable, I don't ever intend to mean that you create a form that everyone then fits into. What I do mean is that spirit, that motivation, ultimately that will that has to be sustained, and honestly, it's got to be sustained generation to generation, can be replicated. But you have to have an ear that's sensitive enough to hear the voices that need to be assembled in that particular area to those particular needs, and you can marshal. And there's always a federal partner at some level. Often they bring the least to the table, but they're there in some fashion. The tax credits, the tax credits. You learn to leverage every single new market tax credit, historic tax credit, low to moderate income housing tax credits. As a pharmacist, I was blissfully ignorant of all of these things at one point, but you begin to learn to press every possible lever. And they will be different in every community that you work in. The good thing is that because they're different, it causes you to be much more imaginative, and you get better solutions by that imagination. And you mentioned Ike. We were hit by Katrina. Let me tell you, a hurricane brings out the definition of neighborhood and community. A Katrina event is a great leveler of humanity. In that event, everyone along the Mississippi coast for a 60-mile stretch, 1.5 miles deep, it was all wiped from the face of the earth. US 90 in the middle of the Gulf. Churches, homes from the finest to the most common in the middle of the Gulf. It was people literally crawling out from under their pile of sticks to help another, regardless of income, color, background, history, anything else. It can teach you a lot about what really sustains a neighborhood, a community, and a people. It's not all bad, the lessons you learn.
Shirley Franklin, as you're looking at Indianapolis and Charlotte and New Orleans for purpose-built communities, what stays from the Atlanta model? What changes?
Well, that's been a big learning experience for us, because clearly the way Eastlake developed is not, we don't suggest that anyone else would do it quite that way, although we do think we've learned some lessons. We do think it has to be holistic. We think it's more than one initiative. It has to be people-focused. One of the great unifiers of folks is what's happening to their children and grandchildren. We believe strongly that you also have to be able to measure what you're doing. Whether you like to talk about that or not, people want to know that their investment is either doing or not doing. There are many people, if you try something and it doesn't work, that's okay too, but they'd like to know the measurement. So what we measure, the people in the community want to know what's measured. We have a brand new school building, well, it's 10 years, 15 years old now, but just because it's new doesn't mean it works inside. So the parents and the children are interested in the student performance as much as we are who talk about it around the country. So we think there are a handful of things that you have to accomplish to do if you'd like to see in 10 years what we have seen in 10 years in Eastlake. Now, you may choose and say, we don't want to do that. That's fine. We still talk to you. We're still interested in sharing our story. The housing has to be full. Otherwise, the model doesn't work. If market rate housing is not, if market rate residents are not interested, then we got a problem, because our model is mixed income. So it has to meet the standards that anyone who has the ability to live any place in the city would want to live. So we believe that there are those basics. Now, my colleague Carol Naughton, who is here, who's been on every side of this, she was the general counsel of the Housing Authority, she was the head of the Eastlake Foundation, and now she is lead person, vice president at Purpose Built Communities. She says we do a dance, we court and then we dance, and then sometimes we agree from both sides what we can add to the discussion at the local level and others. And we ultimately would like to have network members who meet more or less this holistic, multidimensional, targeted by neighborhood focus on breaking the cycle of poverty at the neighborhood level. And that means that we're connected with lots of other people. Prior panel was absolutely correct. Everyone can't work in the neighborhood. Everyone won't be educated in the neighborhood. But the vast majority of people have a significantly better life on a number of different levels because of the experience. So we would also tell you, for instance, we thought we'd go to a high school. We started K to 8, the first charter school in the city of Atlanta. And we thought we would go to a high school, all of us non-educators. But the educators say, no, you need to go earlier. So today, if you live in that community, there are top quality programs from 0 to 3 in collaboration with the YMCA, our Eastlake Foundation, and the school, Drew Charter School. And school starts at 4 years old. So if you come to Drew, you can come at 3. Now that has an economic impact on people's lives. They are in a public school at 3 years old across the street or down the street or 2 blocks away from when they leave. That is a huge advantage both to the family and to the child and obviously to the broader community.
I want to take some of the questions from the audience. This is from the webcast. Are there successful social health initiatives or models that you can recommend, or is health, and especially as it pertains to the sustainability, still a frontier for innovative ideas? Anyone have an answer on that?
Well, I would just say very quickly that the school day is longer, so the health initiatives are built into the school. One of the first things we added to the charter school was mental health services in the charter school way back when I was involved in it, which was 12 years ago. So, I mean, taking into consideration the health of the children and the health of the community, two of our network members in Indianapolis and New Orleans have taken the Eastlake model to an even higher level, developing a wellness center and a community center, similar to what I hear Angela talking about. So yes.
Certainly the health of the citizens you serve should be the #1 priority that's driving you. I mean, the health and safety is the way mayors mostly think about it, but when you again look at areas of this country, especially the South, the way we eat, our diet, the lack of availability to good fresh food, which you think would be readily available in an agrarian society, or that which used to be, but that's not so for most of our citizens. And you look at what it's doing to our citizens, and especially to the children, and then you look at the data that's very clear that Americans are the heaviest people in the world, and then you look at Mississippians are the heaviest people in the United States, which translates to me, my fellow Mississippians are the fattest folks on the planet. So and look what it's doing to their quality of life and their ability as young people to have good, productive lives for hopefully longer than I will have. Well, it does get back to those choices that you make. And I've mentioned the governor of Tennessee, and I put the people of Meridian on a diet and said, we're going to lose 10,000 pounds. Now, the truth is I knew about 75 people personally that could achieve that goal for us. But you want to bring in the whole community. And the business community got involved, the schools got involved, and laws close to that. If you look at Oklahoma City, Mayor Mick Cornett has really made a push about exercise and health and reducing the weight of his fellow Oklahomans. He had a weight issue as well, been very, very successful there, and part of it was by creating a more walkable, transit-friendly community, neighborhoods, and city downtown all tied together. So you see that in places all across the country.
Angela, this is a question for you. Can you expand on the importance of place and location and how that will drive initiatives in the future?
Well, I think we have to get back a little bit to the siloed nature of the way we've constructed our lives, cities, and so forth. We know that resources are constrained. Everyone's trying to figure out how to do more with less. And honestly, that's a joke in the nonprofit sector. It's like do more with less until you're doing everything for nothing forever. That, because we've heard do more with less every year for, 30 years. So, but when we know resources are constrained, we have to start looking at the cost of living in silos, working in silos, learning in silos. Is there a reason a school is just a school? Is there a reason a workplace is only a workplace? Are we going to continue to build things that have one purpose and we only use them 60% of the time? This makes no sense, really. So in addition to the huge, sort of advantages of the integration of all these things in one place, so people move from activity to activity without barriers. There's also just a need to have everything we built have multiple purposes so that we can leverage that sunk cost and that capital investment to its fullest potential. And so I think we'll see a time in the future. Place will always matter because really there is no hug app. You cannot get a hug from your devices, although some of you look so, like you're pretty fond of them. But they're not going to hug you back. I'm just telling you. So, that need for connection, for contact, for closeness, for support, to look into the eyes of another human being and have them know where you're going and what you hope to do, that's still critical in places about the way people come together. But we can be much more creative and flexible. We can design spaces that can evolve as the community changes, and we can do a lot more with the places we've already built. Neighborhood Centers operates in 68 locations. We didn't build all of them. We don't feel the need to. The whole idea that unites all of these efforts is to go into each situation to look at what's there. And it's about arranging the different funding elements. I love what John said, because everybody that's done this work has figured out how to milk every single cow for what it will provide. That would be a Texas kind of way of saying, get all the different sources of funding. But you're arranging all of that and then using the elements that are present. But it has to be with the perspective of what's here, what's working, what's available, and how can that be arranged for success. I just wanted to make one comment. I thought what John said was so important. For those of us who've survived multiple hurricanes and know what it does to community, there are opportunities. And I say this with some sensitivity to it may be too soon, but in a year, new questions will come out of those communities devastated by hurricanes. And the questions will be, how could we use space differently? What can we create that might be fairer and more connected? How do we rebuild in a way that really makes a difference? Because the conversation moves from recovery to a renewal conversation, and that's powerful. We wouldn't wish it on anyone, ever, but it is there are possibilities within the devastation that are worth looking at. So for policymakers and philanthropists, patience, please.
And the devastation certainly forces the issue on you when you're a coastal city and the city's gone. And the temptation is we want to build it back just like it was. And if you can get them to the point of saying, wait a minute, did you love everything about, well, no, I do this differently or that differently, then you get into the ability to really imagine and build your new community in a way from lessons you've learned of what didn't work. But you don't have to have a hurricane to wipe out your city to do that. You can look at neighborhoods, especially older neighborhoods in city centers or some of the suburbs around the city center, and say, well, rather than just rebuilding back that which is lost in the way that it once was, how can we build back or reinvest in a different way that now makes sense in the context of where we find ourselves at this point in the history of our neighborhood or the city or the community? And once you get beyond I want it like I have it imagined in the past somewhere to how I think it can be for the future, then you've really made a step into a thriving neighborhood or a city or region.
And we're just talking about having those evolutions, not provoked by a storm, but by your own deep desire to see more possibilities in your city and in your community. So it's a way to ask, this is really an invitation to ask these kinds of questions without the provocation of a hurricane. So.
To see something that has not been there before, rather than to only see that which has been, I think is the trick.
And we and I think all of us would say, there is a certain gravitation to the worst place. And there's also a school of thought, well, we'll go someplace where it's not quite so hard. And there's sometimes advantages to being in the place nobody else wants to go. It gives you a latitude to think differently and to imagine. Really, the process changes, the players change. You get some credit. You get some credit for taking on something somebody else wouldn't do. So, I'm not a big fan of doing the thing, the easiest thing to do. I mean,
Shirley
as a
said-
mayor, it didn't help you at all. Because the easy things to do, people would say, well, anybody could do that, you know? No, really. And it wasn't that anyone could do it. A lot of times those things hadn't been done either. But you do something really tough, like go into a community no one wants to go into, et cetera. Once you do that, I'm really speaking to people who are thinking about doing this. Once you do that, it's a lot easier to get traction.
I want to say again, there's no way we're going to get to all these questions. I have a whole deck of them here. So take the conversation online to whatworksforamerica.org. This question from the audience is, Peter Edelman reminded us many of the places we're talking about don't have generally, or do have generally low levels of civic engagement, sometimes as a result of a long history of bad experience with government programs. Is it hard to get people involved and to contribute productively?
Yes,
I want to start there because I'll tell you, I have talked to people who say if one more person shows up with a sheet of paper to ask me what my needs are, this is, of course, engagement in poor neighborhoods really meant it was a training program for how to tell people how broken you were and how pathetic things were, so that in the event that that might provoke some modicum of interest in helping you. So that, with that model of engagement, no, you didn't get a lot of takers. That's wearying. It wears everyone out. So, and I'll tell you something interesting, that as we began this inquiry, the appreciative inquiry process, that deep questioning, what matters, what works, who's strong, what makes this a good place to live, because people choose these neighborhoods, by the way, and they're entitled actually to live where they choose. I think that's still true, right? So when we began asking those questions, there were times when people had been so well trained to think that anybody asking them a question was bound to be asking what was wrong, they'd start down that path. And we'd have to ask the question again. And they'd go, oh, you want to know what's great here. Oh, and then they'd tell us. They'd tell us about the person that helped them with their child. They'd tell us about the manager at the grocery store that really was almost the navigator for the whole neighborhood. This whole picture of neighborhood resources and leadership unfolded. But then you get engagement, because really it's around what matters. If I'm asking you, what is your most deeply held dream for your child? That you're going to be engaged. And then I follow up with talking with you about how that gets realized and what you can do. That's engagement. We don't lose them. And they were there for the thinking, the planning, for the doing, for the volunteering. It's not a center that belongs to neighborhood centers. It belongs to everybody in that neighborhood, because it started with the first new question about what's right with this place and how can we build on that. So a lot of engagement strategies are all about what's wrong. And imagine if you had applied to college and you had to fill out a 17-page application in which you described every single failing, weakness, handicap, and problem you had ever encountered in your life. And that, would you go there? Would you even want to go there? I mean, think about it. So.
I want to turn this question to you, Shirley Franklin, and I need to not paraphrase it because it was phrased very well on the card. There's been a lot of discussion about child-focused initiatives. What do you think about including youth voices in designing their own future, and any good examples?
No question about it. I mean, young people today expect to be engaged. They are engaged, maybe not in the adult conversation, but they're definitely talking to each other. The school, the community has to be engaged at every level, from seniors. We talk a lot about child focus, but seniors and students are very, very much engaged in their community. And some of that standard is set by the adults, but some of it is demanded by the young people. We are about to expand into a high school. Up until now, at Eastlake at least, the high school has been, students have gone to other high schools. So we're about to find out about youth engagement in a big way. But in Indianapolis, there's a high school. In New Orleans, they aspire to that. So It's not possible not to have them engaged. But we do have a teen program that is kind of two-way communication that is attached to the first project that we did.
And even when you talk about transportation, the young people become engaged in that conversation. If I'm speaking away somewhere and to a room full of people, oftentimes it's the young people that seem the most motivated and willing to engage in the conversation about how to change ultimately their future when we talk about transportation. And you have two interesting demographics merging here. You have the baby boomers, of who there are a number of us in this room fit that category, that are the largest generation ever in the history of this country, with, thank goodness, the longest life expectancy of any generation in the history of this country. We're going to be healthier, we're going to be more mobile, we want to be connected to our families, to the rest of this country, and you don't want us all on the interstate highway for the next 15 or 20 years. You have, we went out to get a driver's license at 15 because it was our freedom. It was how we communicated with our friends so that mom and dad weren't a part of every conversation. Well, the millennial generation is the other demographic that's merging and making similar choices. As the baby boomers are looking at moving back into downtowns, we want walkable, friendly communities where we can get to fresh food, get to health care. So are millennials. And this is the convertible Mustang for the millennials. It's how they don't pick up 6 friends on this. They pick up 1,000 friends with one click if they want to. This is how they communicate. This is how they engage. And they're making choices about how they move so that they can continue to do this while they're moving. It's shaping how we will build our neighborhoods and our communities. And one of the threads, though, you've heard over and over again is the story has to be told in its human context. We are bad to get into data and numbers to crunch and statistics, but you lose the rest of the public when you do that. Shirley's been telling stories, Angela's been telling stories at the very human scale and human level. That's what ultimately moves people to action. And you ask the question, is it hard to get people to believe? It's hardest, and you'll probably agree, in your own hometown. Investors from outside can see it immediately. It's the people who are closest to it that it's the hardest, and that's why I think you have to tell that story in the human voice that they can understand, and oftentimes you find that articulated through the children of the community. That's where their hearts are grabbed.
Well, in the interest of staying on time, we're going to have to leave it there. Shirley Franklin, John Robert Smith, Angela Blanchard, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and get the next panel started. If I can bring everybody back to attention. I have personally been sitting in the chairs that you all are sitting in for the last 2 hours, and I have to tell you it's much more comfortable up here on the stage. But if I could just ask everyone to get seated for the next panel. What we are going to be talking about in this next panel is how you take the ideas that you've been hearing about and how we actually invest in those ideas and lift them to scale. But before I do that, I have a few marching orders from the conference organizers and planners. And they are, first of all, for those of you all watching online, we do encourage that you submit questions via Twitter, which is #WhatWorks, or you can go to the registration form on the website and do it as well. And for those of you in the audience, we have cards that are in your materials. If you've run out of them because you had so many questions and one of your questions hasn't been asked yet, please ask for another card and someone will be glad to give that to you. And again, for everyone, we're encouraging you to get involved in this discussion through Twitter, through blogging on the website, and there will be local and regional events organized over the next 12 months where we hope to engage as many people as possible. I also just want to say that we did a count, and we have about 300 people in the room, which is really phenomenal, and we have 200 people on the web. So altogether, our real and our virtual audience is about 500 people, which is, I think, a fantastic level of interest for these ideas and for this book. So now I think I get seated to begin the panel. And I have to get mic'd up.
No. He won't let you do that.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So as I said before, what our challenge is in this panel is to turn to people that are part of the private sector, people that are part of philanthropy, to help us understand how it is that we take some of the really exciting ideas and models that we heard about in the previous panel. What can we do to lift these things to scale? How can we really put some vibrancy into the ideas? You know, I continue to be so moved by what you saw in the Booth video. And again, many thanks to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for jumping right onto that and lifting it up so that so many people can see that. But how do we do 1,000 Booth centers? How do we do 1,000 purpose-built communities, 1,000 neighborhood centers, and how do we spread the kind of inspiration that you hear from John Robert and the connection between mobility and transportation all over the United States in a way that allows everyone to feel like they are part of the answer and part of contributing to what our future is going to be. To get us going on that, Ben, I'm gonna start with you and put you on the spot. As an investor, but also a doer and a thinker, because you hold many roles, Ben Hecht. And actually, let me pause. I should introduce our panelists. We have Elaine Arkin with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Ben Hecht, who runs Living Cities, and Andy Ditton, who is a longtime friend and colleague with Citigroup. But putting you on the spot, Ben, how do you see investors and institutions working to scale up these kinds of opportunities?
Sure. I think there's 3 or 4 things that really need to be the focus. One of them is you need to support them. And so that means Angela is best not spending 50% of her time fundraising, right? Wouldn't it be great if Angela could spend 50% of her time thinking and doing? You know, so supporting leaders like Angela and the mayors who you just heard are really critical to be able to do, as well as their institutions. Because I think one of the things that we have to ensure is that it's actually not about Angela or Mayor Franklin, or it's about an institution that's going to be there and survive them. And so it's supporting them. And I think the third type of support that we didn't really talk about a little today, but the last panel came across, is I think we also have to support the public sector to be able to be a really capable partner in this work. And I think oftentimes we sort of ignored that. We said, well, let's nonprofit our way around the problem. And in fact, you can see the difference with the mayors that were here and what's happened in their own cities, that if we can get and help the public sector to be able to be partners with these types of organizations, we're going to be a whole lot more successful in what we're trying to achieve. And then I think the 2 other things, and I'll stop. I think the second thing is that you talked about the quarterback in an earlier panel, or all these other analogies. We have our own name for it, and we call it civic infrastructure. And it actually moves beyond the community, because we believe that many of the essential systems that used to provide a more shared prosperity in our nation are broken. And there's really nobody left to fix them. And so what we're really seeing, whether it's in work that's come out of Cincinnati with Strive, that's now in about 70 or 80 communities, or in the cities that are part of our integration initiative, where you're seeing civic leaders, whether they're public sector, private sector, philanthropic, nonprofit, coming together from the community up to the folks who run the elite institutions and saying, what are the big problems we want to solve? And then how do we collectively say, let's set the goals and over time see that we actually are able to achieve it. And then finally is, I think we want to make sure that people can get this package of capital that they're going to need to get there. Sometimes it's grants to fill in gaps. Sometimes it's flexible capital, as you know very well, Nancy, and are so good at doing, to kind of reduce risk of private capital. And then it's to be able to get private capital to be able to come in. How do we put all those things together to make it so we don't just have one shining object that you can look for in Houston, but you see it happening all over the country?
So Andy, moving to you, Andy is the managing director of the Citi Community Capital Program. He's also, perhaps more important to me, he's the vice chair of the Low Income Investment Fund board. And Andy, what you have been one of the, really, you've been with this work for the last 30 years, pretty much along with me. Do you see investable opportunities in the kind of model that you were hearing from Angela, from Shirley, the kinds of things that are included in this book, the stuff that Ben was just talking about? Do you see an opportunity for private capital to be involved in a way that really becomes part of the engine that moves us forward?
Absolutely, and more so than ever. I think that there are, let me talk about two different things. And I'm not going to talk about risk mitigation, because that's what Ben does. And obviously, if you talk to banks, most banks say, well, we would do more if we could just figure out how to lower our risk. So I don't want to talk about that. The reality for us is that, and we're no different than I think any of the big banks, that we have 160 some people in the community capital business that I co-head. And only about 60 of those actually face customers. The rest are risk mitigators or asset managers or back office in one way or another. And those 60 folks are spread all over the country. So just simply from a physical interaction perspective, it's incredibly important for us if we're going to scale up what we do. And we put something north of $4 billion a year on the street, lending and investing. To do more than that requires intermediaries at the local level, whether they're the kind of cross-silo groups that we just heard about, or they're kind of more traditional CDFIs or CDCs or organizations that are designed to kind of move particular products, particular loan or investment products to customers. We have to find alternatives than our own staff. So for us, almost most of what we do outside of lending on particular affordable housing projects, most of what we do is, I would think of as wholesale. We wholesale money to intermediaries of one sort or another. And the number of capable intermediaries, from my perspective, has grown dramatically over the last couple of decades, and certainly over the last 5 years. To some degree, because some of the banks had pulled back during the last 5 years, so the intermediaries, and particularly CDFIs, expanded dramatically during that period. So it's really important for us to be able to find high-quality, capable partners at the local level who are ambitious. And I'll underscore that over and over in the next hour. I don't like to say to someone who comes to me with or one of our team with a request for a $5 million loan or a $5 million investment, how about making it 50? That doesn't work very well. I'd much prefer to have someone say, I'd like to do 100, and I say, how about 50? It's really important from our perspective that we and our potential customer are kind of in sync in terms of what they're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to accomplish, which is to put a lot of money on the street in a given year with very few people. So that's a really important factor for us as we look, kind of across the country. The second thing is, and this is going to be, I don't want to get into bankerese, and if I do, someone shoot a flare-up. But there is a major distinction nowadays under the new capital regulatory rules between lending and investing. Used to be there wasn't much of a distinction, but now there is. And it's much easier for us to invest monies in a flexible manner, with no repayment expected in the first few years and with longer terms. By that I mean more than 5 years, with longer terms and at more reasonable pricing than it is for us to lend money. Because when you lend money, you have to hold capital against it, and that capital is determined by the risk rating on it. And for most of what we do, the risk ratings are such that under the new Basel III Accords, we have to hold almost 50% more capital than we would if we did the exact same thing as an investment. Because under the new capital accord, what are known as Part 24 investments, CRA-eligible investments, receive just 100% capital cost, so 9 or 10% of the amount you invest. Lending is much higher. That drives the price up, and it makes it much less flexible, and it makes it much shorter because 5 years is the magic cutoff for Basel III. Longer than 5 years, risk ratings go up, capital costs goes up. 5 years or less, the opposite happens. So it's really important that when we're looking at deals, we try to figure out ways to inject our capital nowadays in ways that are the least problematic from a Basel III perspective, meaning we hold the lowest amount of capital against them.
So I'm taking really avid notes. So we need to come in with a $100 million request, and it needs to be for equity. I'm all there, Andy. That's great.
Only if you only want 50.
So say, and I hope everybody in the room is taking notes, because someone approached me this morning and said, I really understood your conversation, but when you started getting into all this numbers about dollars and capital, it kind of went over my head, and it would be sort of like you got plunked down in a detailed conversation about affordable care organizations. So I'm trying to translate this in such a way that it's digestible for others. So come in with big money that is highly flexible in terms of requests. So say a little bit about what gets in the way, but where do you see the barriers? When Shirley or Angela or John Robert walks in the door and says, we've got a need for, we can see $500 million of projects that we were going to be working on over the next few years. Will you be our partner? What's a barrier that prevents you from saying yes to them right away? Either Ben or Andy
I think
on this one.
One of the important questions is, who else is involved? And explain the overall ecosystem of who's going to be a part of that big solution. And so that's one of them. The other part, though, and I think Andy's point and comments really make it clear, is that he's not talking about startup organizations that are going to come in for $100 million. And so I do believe that sort of the love of the startup, the love of the new idea does not play in the hand of long-term change. And there are a lot of institutions who have been around, who've been successful. And the question is, are they happy with what they've done to date, or do they actually want to evolve to take on the larger challenges that are laid out in the book? And I think the real question is, will you go to me or Andy, really, who has much more money, and be able to say, this is what we're building upon. This is who we are. This is our leadership. This is our balance sheet. But more importantly, this is the ecosystem of organizations, public and private, that are working towards get to a population level change, not just another project that will help another 5 people, but something that's going to really be potentially transformational.
Andy?
This is going to come from a very specific perspective, but CRA It's probably the biggest barrier we deal with, and that severely limits what we do in any particular location.
And explain for people that might not know what CRA is.
Hopefully everyone here knows what CRA explicitly is, Community Reinvestment Act. But the problem with how the act is currently configured and how the regulators interpret it is that we end up having very specific goals in every place we have a retail bank branch. In places where we don't have retail bank branches, we have no goals and we don't get any credit for doing anything. So to start with, and particularly for Citi, we have only 63 MSAs in the United States where we actually can do things, lend or invest money, and get CRA credit for it. So that's highly limiting, just geographically. Secondly, each of those areas has a specific goal established that's really based on the amount of deposits we take there as a percentage of all the deposits we take in the U.S. So there's a very real cap on what we will do in any given location. This has been something that people have been kind of battling back and forth on for some time. At one point there was a lot of talk about in CRA modernization taking some of those limits and making them a little bit more flexible, like you could invest throughout states as opposed to just a specific city. But none of that has happened yet. But the reality right now is for an organization like ours, we have to put lots of money in very few places around the country. That's not the case with some of the other big banks who have branches throughout the country. But their problem is almost the opposite. They have to put a little bit of money in all kinds of places all over the country. So when you start talking about going to scale, it becomes very difficult for the banks, for those banks in particular, to move to large scale. And when you talk about going to scale for Citi, it becomes difficult for us to do it other than in one geography at a time.
Elaine, I think you were giving me the...
Yeah. So I'm going to come at this from a little bit different place because the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation cares about improving health and health care for all Americans. So why are we in this room? It's not actually been a theme here, and we're grateful that Nancy and David included a commentary from our CEO and President, Risa Lavisa-Moret, in the book. But I want to talk about going to scale for what are some of the other things that are required. And a major theme in the book is pulling it all together. And the other theme, of course, is doing more with less. And both of those are reasons why we are here as well, representing a broader health community. Jonathan Fielding is the health director in Los Angeles, has great heat maps, and it shows neighborhoods in South Los Angeles. And one is pockets of poverty where community development is working. And the other one, which looks identical, shows diabetes rates. And so we like to say, along with David and Nancy, that we've been working with the same populations in the same neighborhoods for the last 40 years, but we don't know each other. It's like you're saying, everybody knows what CRA is. And also, we've been talking about CDCs. Well, for us, CDC is Centers for Disease Control. So, and yet we care, as Angela was saying, this is all about the people. And we care about the same people. And the point of the booth video is that community development affects health. It doesn't matter whether that's your intention or not. It's either going to make it better or make it worse, depending upon whether you put in the transit stops in the poor neighborhoods or not. So we might as well make it intentional. And we think that health can bring some things to the table as well. We think that coming together, and you've heard it mentioned as silo piercing or crossing silos. I like to think particularly at the community level, but in this administration, it's also been at the highest department level, coming together to share both what we want to see happen and what our strengths are, not just the deficiencies. So from a health point of view, one of the things that is very important to us in our work, not only at the foundation but in public health, is evidence-based approaches and metrics. We've got so many metrics. We've got catalogs of metrics. We have whole projects that just give you access to database to say what the metrics are. And we think that some of those can be very accessible to community development. Can use existing data. I don't know whether, how many people in this room are familiar with the community health rankings? All right, so it's one of the things that the foundation has done to enable in a county or a city folks to look at measures that have an effect on health, and there's certainly not all health things. Transportation is there, education is there, and a number of liquor stores is there. So we think that there are a lot of tools that we already have that we can share with community development to help you make the case. So if you're going to an investor, you can say not only are we going to improve the buildings, but we're going to improve the lives of the people who live in those buildings or use those buildings. In order to make those connections, to make the community development work more successful, and to have a better effect on the health of people, which is what we want, we've been working together over the past few years, and we started out with this huge language problem. So one of the things we hear all around the country is that we have to find some common language. And part of that is things like what a CDC is, and not talking about social determinants of health, but talking about where we live, learn, work, and play, and how that can have so much more effect on our health and our lives than what happens in a doctor's office. So part of it is just, having things click so that we realize we're working on the same things. But the other is the storytelling that John Robert was talking about, because we're not talking just about data, we are talking about people. Healthier people are more able to learn, more able to hold a job, contribute to the economy of the community. People who are better educated get better jobs, higher the income, more likely you are to be healthy and live a longer life. It's so interconnected, we can't tear it apart. It's been an artificial thing that we've been trying to work on one aspect and not the other. And as Peter Edelman said this morning, it's not simple. You can't work on just looking within a square of a neighborhood and saying, if I fix this, if I just look in this neighborhood, we can take care of the problem. So, health is in there whether you want it or not. So one of the things is being able to tell those stories like Booth, to say that we can help you tell a better story and get better outcomes by both collecting the data and working intentionally to improve health, which connects to jobs, to education. It's all part of the same mix. The other thing is that we need to make the connections. We don't all know each other. We don't know each other in a community. And you heard in the last panel about the importance of engagement across a community because people bring different assets. That's also true at the county, the state, the national level. So that we need to work to connect our communities. What this means is that we're not talking about a one-off in a community and another community and another community. You're talking about you can only fund in so many communities. I think to back up that, we need to have a change in the form of a movement that says in this country, we can no longer look at community development and development of people's lives and helping people have the opportunities to have a full life separately. And, the integration of the work that we do is not a short-term thing, but it really has become an aha moment. There's a growing pressure, I think, on all of us working on this for people saying, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And so that's, I'm sorry, a little bit too long a way of saying that bringing it to scale is clearly we need funding sources, but we also need to come together across communities to build a movement that supports the organizations that are trying to raise the money, that are trying to advocate for changes in their community, that are trying to improve access to healthy food. So Mississippi is not the heaviest state in the country, trying to make sure that there's transportation so that people can get to a better job, can get to the grocery store.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Elaine. One of the things that I'm taking away from what you said, but also what Andy and Ben have talked about, is connection. It is connection between us and language. It's connection between people, place, and then the capital and the philanthropic support that needs to happen. When Elaine first met me, when I said the word basil, she thought I was talking about a little plant that grew in my windowsill that I used to cook with. But I think helping us all kind of get fluent in these languages will actually build additional assets for us. I've already gotten some questions from the audience.
She has more for you.
And we have more coming in. But I did want to take the first one because it gets to this notion of, I'm sorry to make you stretch like that. It does get to this question of connection, and it is one of the major causes of the silo effect is the dominant practice of both public and private funding. What would you change about funding? I guess the question is, if you had a magic wand, what could we do about the resources that we have that presently are in different silos and with different character, private money, philanthropic money, et cetera? What could you do about that to catalyze and establish this kind of approach for achieving collective impact? How do you pierce a silo if you don't live in San Francisco?
Okay, so I want to start at the federal level. And I know all day we've said it's not about the federal government, and we are in Washington, D.C. So actually right here it kind of is about the federal government. So I want to talk about how to take advantage of that. How many of you are familiar with the National Prevention Council? Okay, so, as always, we've got health people and community development and financing. So under the Obama administration, there has been a National Prevention Council, and more than a dozen departments and agencies are required to have senior leadership as a part of that, and they have been also required to come up with a plan for how within their own agency and their work and their mission to also improve health. So it has become, how we're talking about all these things are interconnected. That's true, but each of us is going to have our own focus so that it's entirely fair and appropriate that HUD is focused on housing but thinks about PS, how that affects health. So it's become an exercise in how actually to break down those barriers between interests. And what does that have to do with funding flow? It means that, for example, with the program Communities Putting Prevention to Work, CPPW, I think that's Communities Putting Prevention to Work, there's money going into health departments, but health departments are putting some of that money into school buildings, buying equipment so that there can be healthy food prepared again the way schools used to cook their own food. They're putting it into transit because they know that people need to have access to public transit. So we have we're experiencing a time when the heads of federal departments are talking to each other and also connecting at the state and local level and mingling funds. So we're modeling how to do that at a federal level, and in this case the focus is health, but it doesn't have to be health. It's got to be something. But in this case it's health. We're modeling how to do that also in the community level with a lot of the sustainable communities, a lot of the money that's gone in at the community level. So we see how we can enrich that funding flow and use, both at the highest level and at the local level. I don't think we're there at the, what has been referred to as the career leadership in the federal government. And so one of the opportunities now is to look over the next 4 years at the money that can become an incentive for departments to continue to work together through the National Prevention Council and to model among staff leaders in the departments who are going to be there after the leadership is gone, how they can work together and to make those actual connections in the staff that will last. And if we can do that, if we can have those managers knowing each other and how to work together and why it's a benefit, because it's really harder than doing it yourself, if we can do that over the next 4 years, we'll have a systemic change that gives us a way to de-silo some of those funds. It may be coming to HHS, but it could also flow through education and vice versa.
Ben?
Nancy, I want to take a little bit of a different tack, which is, I think, it was something that I think Sarah Wartell said yesterday about trying to get $1.20 worth of value out of, excuse me, out of 80 cents. And I think one of the real challenges is not where's the new money coming from, but how do we actually have the political will, excuse me, and provide the leadership to actually redirect the existing billions of dollars that are really poorly spent, meaning they're not getting the results we want, not waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm talking about actually the money going to the programs right now that don't get the results we want. And that means you have to overcome all the institutions that currently are getting those resources. But that's why we're really encouraged by some of these approaches that are happening around the country. And I'll just focus on the Cincinnati Strive model where Strive came out of. Because when they started, they got the civic leaders from across the board to say, we are failing our kids from the day they're born until the day they're supposed to get out of the house. That's my own view with 20-year-olds. And what they realized was they were all as much a part of the problem as part of the solution. Everybody around that table. The head of the university, the head of school systems, the head of Procter & Gamble, the head of the community foundation. And what they said was, we are program rich and systems poor. We don't want any more programs. Everybody gives us money for a program. A program isn't a system. And when they started this, all these foundations said, we want to give them money for my program. They said, no, we want to take the billions we already have that come in every year that don't get the results. And so I think it's really critical. And this is where the breakdown, and Peter Edelman, I think, spoke of it really well. It's like you're not going to be in that conversation about redirecting those funds if you're simply looking just within the four walls of the boundaries of your neighborhood. You've got to do both. And if you work only to get it right in your community, you're going to be out of the conversation. That is where the billions of dollars locally are going to come from. And that is really, really critical. You've got to be able to play. You've got to be bilingual.
And, just building on that, I have heard Angela Blanchard say, could somebody please just fund us for achieving the things that we are trying to do, not just for doing those things, but actually achieving the outcomes that we want to have. And I think that's the spirit of what you're saying, Ben. We have another question that says that Andy mentioned the impact of policy on investment and community development, particularly CRA. What other public policy changes or incentives are needed to get this up to scale, particularly at a federal level, but at a local level?
Well, I mean, we were just talking about one kind of obvious. Banks can be open to financing schools and primary care clinics and affordable housing and all kinds of things. somebody at the local level needs to bring that together. We don't, from a banking institution perspective, bring that together. As far as I know, outside of the kind of certain very limited programs at HUD and HHS, there isn't any policy initiative pushing to bring these things together. There's no effort made to integrate healthcare delivery, despite the new, millions of people who will now have access and can pay for primary care and preventive care. There's no, buried inside the Affordable Health Care Act is some money available that can be unlocked apparently, although it's a little hard to build primary care clinics. I don't think there's anything that is linking where those clinics get built with affordable housing being constructed, with charter school or educational facilities being constructed, with things like you've talked about in the last couple of days, linking any of that to transit-oriented development.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, putting a healthcare clinic out in Nowhereville, in an old industrial zoned community or neighborhood, isn't very helpful. But when we look at what we're funding at the moment, unfortunately, a lot of the, particularly charter schools, but also clinics, are being located in areas where somehow people have to get to it. And it's not by walking, because there isn't available space and land necessarily where folks live in central cities, at least. So there is no, as far as I know, strategy beyond kind of the local kind of regional planning commissions and so forth in most major metropolitan areas. There is no strategy to attempt to kind of integrate the different legs of a community development plan, and there certainly isn't at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try to be positive, take a positive spin on what Andy just said, because I think there really is some really. I was going to say about the no, because I think one of the more exciting or encouraging things that has happened over the last 4 years has been HUD and transportation, USDA, EPA working together along the sustainable communities, the concept of sustainable communities. And the idea there really is to try to say, actually, where they get back to what Alan was saying in the first panel, that it's not just about a place, it's about a regional economy. And if you're going to say we want to improve certain places and make them vibrant, but we also want to improve the economic livelihood of the people, it's going to take very different ways of working together. That's not just about transit, but it's about what are the opportunities that transit is going to allow, and what's the intentionality that's going to go into that process. And what's interesting, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but those agencies are working together in an unprecedented way for the first time. But a lot of it is really driven by the personality of the leadership in each of those agencies. But it really is a promising change. It doesn't necessarily change the way Congress appropriates dollars, which is a different challenge to silos. But there is a huge amount of administrative regulatory flexibility, and sometimes just getting people who know each other and trust each other to say, yeah, that all seems fine, that's not actually needing a waiver or the like, goes a long way. And so I think there really are some encouraging institutionalization of that kind of working.
Well, so that in a way, Ben, what you're saying is there's clearly leadership at the federal level, there's leadership within the agencies, there's leadership within the staff that are working below the secretary level and at the on the regular staff level to try to begin creating connection between these agencies. But we have one question from our audience that says, do you have experience on this notion of the quarterback, or this idea of connectedness down at the community level? Do you have experience in getting the players, community groups, to use shared measures, to come together around goals and measures that help coordinate and deliver resources effectively, especially when there is no natural champion that's going to die in the ditch, as John Roberts said. Ben? I think this is a perfect one, actually, for Ben.
I love that to set up. One of my staff probably sent that
please,
in.
Yeah.
But that's fabulous. No, I mean, that really is the backbone of these approaches, both in these integration initiative communities that you could look up at www.livingcities.org, and but also in this work with Strive. So let me just take a minute and talk about it, because the whole idea is that you're getting these very different institutions, people, partners from local and from community and city and even regional level to come together, not around a place, but around a result. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, when you have a focus on the result, the disparity in the result tends to be in those places that we care about. So you can't avoid place, you don't want to avoid place, but it takes out the whole conversation locally about, well, we've invested in that part of town for too long, we're done. And it actually goes more to, no, we want to see that every child in this region, has this education or these opportunities. And so the model there is that you get the leadership from all those people, from all those institutions together, number one. Number two, they actually agree on what metrics they want to see the world change, how they want to see the world change. Number three, they actually get the data to say, where are we now? And then they set goals for where do we want to go. And then finally, they look at it every year in a transparent, open way, and they say, how are we doing? And most importantly, how do we have to change the way we're funding these ways that we thought we're getting the results, but now that we get the data, we realize we're not. And it really is, those are the fundamental drivers of those approaches. They're new, the oldest Strive model, for example, is 6 years old, the one in Cincinnati. But if you look at how many of those metrics are going up, it's very positive. But more importantly, I think, is that this is almost a bipartisan approach to solving huge problems that we have in our country, which is, it's not about white, it's not about black, it's not about rich, and not about poor. It's about creating the society that we as Americans want to have. And when you break it down to, don't we want every kid to be able to read by third grade? In our community, maybe we don't care about the community next to ours, but the community, don't we want them in our community? Don't we want everybody to be able to have an ability to get, preventative care by the time, moms when they're prenatal care? There are certain things that we as Americans believe across in a bipartisan way. We just don't actually have ways to hold ourselves accountable to whether or not we're achieving them in the places in which we live.
Perfect. So I'm I'm pulling a few of these threads together. So we know that the folks that have been involved very much on the health side of this work are terrific at evidence and measures. We know that frequently capital markets move because of evidence and measures. And we hear, I think, from Ben, really a hunger for focusing on results, not just producing widgets. And it seems to me that somehow sort of linking these things together without turning ourselves into complete data wonks will create an opportunity for forward motion and doing better, doing the same things that we do now better, and maybe even meet Sarah Wartel's challenge on the first panel of getting 120 cents for the 80 cents that you put in. We have just a couple of minutes left in this panel. I do want to remind you, especially those of you online, to tweet if you have questions at #WhatWorks. I'm getting tired of saying that. I feel like President Obama. But there is a question that came from someone online that said, how can those of us who have expertise in crunching those numbers be supportive of those who are telling the stories? Who wants to take that? I think it might be Elaine.
Well, it's a great question because the story has two parts. The storytelling's no good unless you can say, and this is why it works. And the numbers don't work so well without the story. It's the individual engagement. So at the foundation, one of the things that's very important for us is policy research. And I have seen so many, policy books this big that are charts and charts and charts and charts, and there's no one who can take the time to digest that, unlike the book. It's the data crunchers, I think that's what the person called themselves. There needs to be a dialogue between the person who is advocating for a program, policy, or funding stream and the data crunchers to say, what is, this is the evidence that I need, and what do the numbers tell you? And so often there's not that conversation because the data folks figure out what data they collect rather than starting with what that need is. What is the story that needs to be told? What is the evidence that needs to be collected to support a position? And the same thing happens on the policy advocacy side, that we don't really engage the data crunchers in a way that you say, this is what we need to know, so that they can say, oh, well, we can just run that for you in a different way. Why didn't you tell me? So it's a fabulous partnership if we can combine the data, which really it does, this is the evidence base that we need if we have the right data, and what it means in the lives of people.
That's great. I want to ask kind of one of those kind of out-of-the-box questions for all of you, and just see how you react. I know Andy and Ben have been part of building the community development field for the past, I don't want to give away your ages, but a long time. And what we are talking about here really is, if I can be audacious, a bit of a paradigm shift in the way that we've thought about it. You heard Peter Edelman say that as well this morning. I would like you both to reflect on what surprised you the most as you think about how we've built this field and where it needs to go. What surprised you the most over the years in putting it all together? And Elaine, I'm going to pose that to you, but in a short term. Yeah.
Okay, I'll start.
Okay, you start.
I guess two things in particular have surprised me, and this is less over my whole career and more over the last 10 years. Obviously, the last 5 years in particular, if you've been in the financial industry, has been rather tumultuous, to say the least. And so I may have a bias here, but what we have seen, at least from my business's perspective, in terms of community development and how it's evolving, is kind of almost a dramatic splitting of the industry. The industry is so much bigger than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's really just dramatic, but it has split. There is this huge portion of this industry that I will call a for-profit component. It's most of the affordable housing that's being built is being built by for-profit developers. A lot of the charter schools that are being built now are being built by operations that function, either are for-profits or are functioning as for-profits. A lot of the healthcare clinics that we're financing and that we've seen being financed are being built by huge for-profit healthcare systems. When I started in this business, none of that was true. Nothing of that sort was happening. It was all being built by nonprofits. And obviously the scale was very different, but it was being built by folks that were anchored in those communities and not coming in from outside. So there's this whole component to the industry, which is by far the biggest piece of this industry, that to me has kind of the characteristics of a for-profit industry. and that we can underwrite and finance just like a for-profit industry, and we do. And is where we're getting most of our scale from.
Mm-hmm.
Shift to more of what's been talked about over the last couple of days. When you think about what's being attempted in real low-income communities, low and moderate income communities that are not communities of choice, by the nonprofit, the institutions that are anchored in those communities, and you think about the comprehensiveness of what they're attempting. And I don't mean the great examples that have been talked about over the last few days, because everybody's aware of those. We've read about them. They're high profile, and one of the reasons they're high profile is because they've also been really successful. But there are lots of things being attempted on smaller scales that have not yet achieved success or more limited success and are not as high profile, and are being kind of cobbled together at the local level. I don't mean a deal, I mean programs and strategies to actually move a community forward that I think get lost in the weeds. And those efforts, particularly when you get out of the major metropolitan areas. If you go to upstate New York, you leave New York City and you go to Syracuse or Rochester or Buffalo, there are really interesting strategies that people are working on. They may be neighborhood, they may be an area of the city, they may be the whole city, but they're really interesting. They're not getting much attention and they're not getting much funding. And what struck me in the book, there's a section on poverty, and I think it's the second chapter. And it talks about where poverty is in the United States and notes that I think it's 23% of people under the poverty line are in central cities. The rest are in suburbs, small cities, or rural. So arithmetic says 77% of the folks living under the poverty line are outside of the areas we actually are focused on. And that to me is something that really that has to change. And we have to be obviously part of the change of that. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about trying to get CRA refocused away from only allowing us to work in central cities, basically.
Good point. Ben, what surprised you?
Two things. So the first one is the sheer success of, I think I talked about this in my piece in the book, the sheer success. And you can beat yourself up. I think we're somewhat beating ourselves up in these couple of days. But I think the reality is when you talk to people in different sectors, they will say the most successful nonprofit sector in the country is the community development sector. Who else has gotten a federal tax credit to do your work? Maybe two of them, right? And so I think that the sheer success, and that wasn't happenstance, right? That was leaders. Those were institutions that year in and year out, had presence here. It was helping states be able to use the credits. It was building local capacity. That, I think, is the scale of that and the impact of that, I think, is extraordinary. The flip side is, what is a surprise is how basically it's been captured as a technical response to a problem. And it therefore sort of we put our heads down, we did the work, we became incredible experts. And when we lifted our head up, the world had changed a lot. And we're like, oh my God, I'll just put my head down and keep doing the work. And I think the ability to adapt to the changing times, the changing tools, when I talk to people and they say, I still do community organizing by knocking on doors, that's the only way you can do it. When millions of people in those neighborhoods are on social networks, you're just like, hold on a minute, what's wrong with this picture? And so I think the other part of it is the surprise at the slowness of adapting to the times, the changing times and the changing tools available because of that.
Very good. Very good.
So two quick things. One is, I don't know whether it's a surprise exactly, but it's really comforting that even though community development and health have been working separately, even in the same neighborhoods, when you get past the fact that our focus has been different, our methods are very similar. So when Angela was talking about how you engage a community, and I'm with you on those needs assessments, let's just talk about where the strengths are. The way that we have talked in public health about how to engage in a community and what those lessons learned are and what it takes from the quarterback to the way to get people on board is exactly the same. So sometimes we speak different languages, sometimes our focus is different, but our methods are so similar and so complementary, we can come together very quickly. The other thing that has been a surprise, because the public health field is not that fast to change either. It's a big, slow boat. Is social determinants of health, the big clunky term that we use. We really only started using it in a mass way, I don't know, less than a decade ago. It has changed health and has changed public health very quickly. And the rapidity, and certainly social media and all the opportunities we have to connect has helped, but the rapidity has been just amazing, so that when we talk about what happens outside the doctor's office is so important to health, everybody gets it. And, it used to be in the many decades that I worked in health and healthcare that if we came, if we were to come up with a cure for cancer, it would take like 25 years to even get it out to doctors. And now we're looking at a huge change at the way we look at health in this country, and people have come on board in years, not decades.
Thank you. Well, I hope all of you have found this a very enriching conversation in this panel as well as throughout the day, but please join with me in thanking our panelists for helping us get to scale. Great. David's coming. Take the mic off. Okay. Start? Okay.
All right. We'll just have a few just closing thoughts here from the conversation we've had today, and also sort of thinking about what we're going to need to do going forward. And I guess it would sort of summarize it in just three sort of words. One is learn, the second is talk, and the other is build. That's the social determinants of health mantra. But in terms of learning, I think one thing we didn't make clear was that we had all-day policy discussion yesterday at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and you've heard already the different Basel or Basel, or if it's CDC in Atlanta versus a community development corporation. Another one that came up was mission-related investment. We forgot to sort of, these are funds that foundations use to promote their mission but also make a profit, and we often refer to them as MRIs. And so the pediatricians in the room came up to me afterwards and said, what exactly do you mean by MRIs? It seems like an odd use of that term. So we certainly have a lot of learning to do. That is for sure for each other. And I really appreciate Shirley Franklin's point about how surprised she was of how much there is still to learn. And Sarah's point about how we need to make these networks of these learning communities, because this is complicated, and that's why we wrote the book. And in many ways, people said, look, no one reads books anymore. It's too long. It's sort of, and I would just ask everybody, if you can, just try to read it. I mean, it's it's long, and if I had more time, we would have made it shorter, I promise. But it's still it's something that's really important to get a chance to do that. The other is to talk, and I think that's something Nancy said before, that she's we used to really. And when we have these conversations, that means more of these regional meetings and things like that. So those of you who are watching online and those of you who are maybe not from the Washington, D.C. area, we really want to bring this conversation to your community. And I think one of the things, there's kind of three rules, I think, when we approach those conversations. One is to be humble. And I think Nancy had said before, I'm going to quote her now, which is about how in community development, we really believed if we got the buildings right, we would solve the problem. And when you talk to the health people, they say things like, wow, we really thought if we could just get everybody health care, we'd solve the disparities in health outcomes. And the reality is we were all wrong about all these different siloed approaches. It really requires all of us working together. So if anybody says they have the answer, they're either a liar or a fool. And so we just need to be humble in that regard. So that means listening to each other, but being open to sort of getting to the point where we can decide and start building on some things. And in terms of this idea about building, that's the third point I wanted to make. You saw a lot of discussion today about these sort of big structures above that Peter Edelman talked about, promised neighborhoods. There's a lot of activity in Washington, and we heard a lot of that yesterday at the Fed about these different programs that are trying to pierce the silos and be comprehensive and integrated and all the rest. You also heard from some of the examples today in Houston, Atlanta, and other places where people are trying from the bottom up, trying to integrate and all the rest. There's some areas in the middle, and Sarah Wartell sort of discussed this as well, these kind of intermediate institutions. We've spent some time on this concept of the quarterback, but there are a lot of others. Ben mentioned Strive Network, that's doing some really fantastic work about bringing together these different groups. But it's these there are these groups within that, these intermediary agencies that are sort of our institutions that we just have to build, whether it's accountable care organizations or something like Summit County doing the accountable care community. I think that's pretty exciting. And just the last thing I just say is, you know, it's interesting. Slavery had been around for 10,000 years. It was gaining strength in the 19th century, and then it was ended then. And I think you must go see the movie Lincoln if you have the time. I really encourage you to read Doris Kearns Goodwin's book on Team of Rivals that it was based on. But this is an idea that it was an institution that people thought would be around forever. It was ended, and it was ended by people who didn't necessarily agree with each other or like each other. But that coalition was held together, and it did something amazing. And I think, with no disrespect to the gospel according to Mark that was quoted earlier, I do think the challenge of the 21st century is to end poverty. And I think we can do that, and I think we have a moral obligation to do so. So I hope you join us in this conversation and help us build the institutions we need to do that. So thank you all for coming.
And I'm gonna wrap up and just add a couple of points. I thought David just did a brilliant synopsis summary of a couple of key points, and I don't have very much to add to that. But what I will say is that I do think there is a race underway for who can come up with the best name for the quarterback. We've heard quarterback, we've heard champion who will die in a ditch. We've heard orchestra leader, and we've heard from Angela, a cow that you milk all the different resource flows. So whatever analogy we come up with, maybe that we'll have to do a vote on the website about which one that we want, but I think that's that's a great problem to have. I also just wanted to repeat something that Peter Edelman said, which was one of the places that we didn't I think we didn't get right. We didn't spend as much time as we should have in the book, and I hope we do on the website, is the question of race and racial disparity, and also the question of gender. I think those are gaps, and we need to fill that in. We need to bring that into our conversation. We need to bring that into the written word. I also am hearkening a little bit back to what Sarah Wartell said when she was linking the notion of evidence to the idea of fiscal constraint, and let me also link that to the idea of scale. It's evidence, I think, that is going to help us in a period of fiscal constraint, and we will get to scale. The community development movement, I like to say whenever I get a chance to speak, is a movement that was built on reversals. It wasn't a movement that was built with a silver spoon in its mouth. It has been given so many death sentences in just my short 30-year career that I can't even count them. And every single time that has happened, we have stepped up to that challenge, and we have created the next generation of community development, and it was stronger than the one before. So this is really an opportunity. A period of constraint and of self-reflection is truly an opportunity for us, and I know that the people in this room, the colleagues that are out there watching via web, are the ones that I want to have at my side as we figure out how to get into the next generation of what we're going to do. And I also wanted to hearken to something that John Roberts said, where he said it surprises him how replicable this is. This is replicable stuff. You don't have to be in Chicago. You don't have to be in New York. You can be in Salisbury, North Carolina. You can be in small towns. You can be in rural towns. The kind of thing that we're talking about really at the end of the day is common sense. And it's putting the pieces together in a way that's a little bit different than we've done in the past. So those are my reflections beyond what David has said. I do want to once again thank the partner that has been such a fantastic partner to the Low Income Investment Fund, and that is the Federal Reserve Bank, particularly the bank in San Francisco, but the Federal Reserve System as a whole. And we could not get this done but for the partnership at all levels: philanthropy, capital, intellectual partnership, governance of the Low Income Investment Fund, the partnership of Citigroup and the Citi Foundation. And then thank you, all of you who have come out today to be a part of this, who've given us your questions, your thoughts, who've sat long enough to try to listen to what we have to say. We hope to engage you in an ongoing discussion over the future. So thank you so much for being a part of this discussion.